Chapter 11:27. Dean wanted to explore the hidden secrets of the Empire, but he also knew that he couldn't protect himself with his current strength, let alone go to the Empire. But the harvest brought by the research was huge. He saw the shadow of God. If he saw it, there was a possibility to do it. Using magic marks to stimulate the body is just a drop in the bucket. It can't stimulate all the potential. I need to find a more suitable and efficient way through research, Dean thought. Although he saw the way, but it was very difficult to take this step. Throughout the ages, he was by no means the first to see this possibility. For example, Burrow, Crimson Moon, and their research showed that they also saw such a realm of life. It was like a human seeing the sun, but to climb the sun, it was more than 10,000 times more difficult. After a short rest, Dean continued to dive into the new experiment. This time he didn't study himself, so he connected all the instruments in the office to greatly improve the efficiency of the research. If the consortium discovers my research through the instrument network, they won't understand what I'm researching. Instead, they will think that they know my secrets, but they won't know that I've disconnected from the network to study my body, Dean thought. After a few days of research, he no longer closed the office and devoted himself to his own experiment. At this time, the experimental data that he had read before played a role. There were some experts who tried to stimulate the potential of life, such as electric stimulation, nerve pain stimulation, and so on. For Dean, nerve pain stimulation obviously didn't have a big effect. Since he woke up, he had fought countless battles and suffered countless injuries. It could be seen that the effect of this method was too poor. He could only choose to use electric stimulation. He used the company's internal channels to buy new materials. There were undead, monsters, special bloodthirsty plants, and young men and women of different ages. These ordinary people without skills were sold at a low price. The relatively high price of ordinary people were trained as maids or had special talent. Zhang Lanxin and others weren't surprised to see undeads and monsters being transported over. But they were surprised to see 4 young men and women of different ages. Chu Huiru quickly asked Dudian, "Qin Mo, has your experiment reached the live experiment stage?" Dean vaguely said, "Almost, I have some confidence." The 4 of them were shocked. They didn't expect that Dean would be able to figure out the results in just 2 months. Thinking of this, the 4 of them were excited and looking forward to it. Although they felt that the possibility of Dean's success was very low, they couldn't help but have a glimmer of hope. When the 4 young men and women who were transported over saw their surroundings and the conversation between Zhang Lanxin and the other 3, their faces turned pale with fright, and their eyes were filled with despair. However, even the kind and benevolent Zhang Lanxin did not plead for them when she saw them. She only showed some pity. This was not because Zhang Lanxin had seen through people's hearts because of the debt collection, but because she had seen this kind of thing many times before. Moreover, she had personally conducted experiments on living people. To her, this was work, and it did not involve any other emotions. Moreover, the company had already told them about the origins of these people. They were all volunteers that the company had spent money to recruit from society. The experiment continued. 1 week later, suddenly 2 people came to Dean's laboratory. Zhang Lanxin and others who were busy with their experiments were shocked when they saw the 2 people. They quickly stopped their experiments, took off their silicone gloves, and hurried to greet the 2 people politely. "Boss! Mr. 1D. Hello, Mr. 1D. Zhang Lanxin and others called out in succession. The one they called Mr. 1D was standing on the left. He was slender, wearing a black suit, wearing an expensive mechanical watch made by a master. He had golden hair. Although he looked more than 40 years old, but he was very handsome. He was a very handsome uncle. Next to him was a burly man with short hair. His eyes were like lightning. He was Chinese, wearing a sleeveless blue shirt. His muscles were bulging, and he looked like a bodyguard. Zhang Lanxin and others directly ignored this person, but the next moment they found that the CEO of the Randy Company, who was also the biggest boss of the company, just smiled, and then with a bit of politeness and modesty said to the burly man next to him, "The person is inside, please wait a moment." Then he told Zhang Lanxin, "Call Qin Mo out." Zhang Lanxin and others were very keen in observing people's expressions. They were shocked and deeply looked at the burly man who looked like a bodyguard. Two words emerged in their mind: consortium. Only people from the Terrace Consortium could make Wendy so polite. Otherwise, as the boss of the Randy Company, even in the face of the directors of the Locke Consortium and the Milan Consortium, he didn't need to be so humble. "Looking for me?" Dean came out of the laboratory. When the two came to the building, he had noticed them. He also used his ultrasonic hearing to hear their casual conversation. It seemed that the people from the headquarters of the Terrace Consortium had come to look for him. It seemed that they wanted to take him away. Zhang Lanxin saw Dean come out, so she didn't go forward. She asked Wendy, "Boss, why are you looking for little Qin? It's none of your business here. You go out first." Wendy slightly shook his head. His attitude was somewhat cold. Zhang Lanxin, Chu Huiru, and the others looked at each other. They seemed to feel that the visitor didn't come with good intentions. In the past, right, Wendy would always greet them with a smile and be very polite to them, who had level 1 authority and were the pillars of the company. He would never be so rude. However, after all, the other party was the boss. They had no temper and could only leave. Before leaving, Zhang Lanxin said with a worried look, "Boss, if little Qin's experimental project made the company feel embarrassed or he spent too much money, I hope you can be magnanimous. I can bear part of the cost for little Qin. The failure of the experiment isn't his fault alone." Wendy shook his head and smiled. "All right, go out. You don't need to worry about it." Zhang Lanxin wanted to say something but stopped. Kong Ji, who was next to her, winked and dragged her away. The door of the laboratory was closed. Later, Wendy wanted to talk to Dean, but he saw Dean sitting on the chair next to him. He looked at his legs as if he was the owner of the room and looked at the two guests. Wendy slightly raised his eyebrows. He was unhappy in his heart. However, he knew the identity of the latter. His face was slightly cold as he indifferently said, "Mr. Qin Mo, the consortium is looking for you. They need you to go over, please." Dean looked at the man next to him with interest. "Rank 10, oh no, it should be rank 11. I didn't expect that the consortium of the Federation could cultivate such a strong person. If I remember correctly, rank 9 is the ruler, rank 10 is the abyss. Rank 11 is the level of the middle abyss in the Empire. I don't know what kind of power you can display if you drive the monster mecha of Locke Consortium." Wendy was stunned. He turned to look at the man next to him. Chapter 11:28. The consortium finally couldn't bear it anymore? Dean looked at him with interest. Wright was taken aback. He couldn't help but ask, "You already knew that we knew your identity? Are you talking about a tongue twister?" Dean glanced at the boss of the company. "I want to know the reason why you suddenly invited me to the consortium. Is it because the observation period is over? Or are you going to torture me for something?" Wright was about to open his mouth, but the brawny man next to him coldly said, "You will know the specific reason when you arrive at the consortium." Dean slightly raised his eyebrows and smiled. "So you are ready to forcibly kidnap me? This is the center of Odin area. How much do you think the losses will be caused if a fight breaks out here?" Wright's eyelids twitched as he looked at the brawny man next to him. The brawny man didn't wait for him to speak as he sneered. "If you resist, then we will kill you. If you don't want to die, then come with us obediently." "Are you threatening me?" Dean looked at him with a faint smile. The brawny man coldly said, "You can understand it that way." Dean smiled as he gently tapped the table. "There are 8 rank 10 masters in the surrounding buildings, 8 laser guns, 3 creators mecha on standby in the emergency tunnel 3 streets away, 5,000 troops and 12 combat helicopters. Do you dare to threaten me? Not only did Letwendy's expression change drastically upon hearing this, even the burly man's pupils constricted and his expression changed. The smile on Dean's face disappeared little by little. He slowly stood up and indifferently looked at the brawny man. Come over and kneel down. What? The burly man felt as if he had heard something unbelievable. His eyes widened, and then he laughed out loud in anger. So what if you sensed it? Previously, I was afraid of your battle strength. Now that your perceptive ability is so strong, it indicates that you are a demon fighter with perceptive ability but weak fighting ability. Now that you know that we've been fully prepared, you should be obedient. Noisy! Dudian coldly snorted. His body moved as fast as an afterimage. The brawny man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly pushed Letwendy away. His entire body's skin transformed, and he entered the demon body. However, halfway through the transformation, only a thin layer of cuticle-like scales grew on his skin. Before he could completely transform, a cold face appeared right in front of him. The burly man turned pale with fright and reflexively raised his hand to block. Gotcha! There was a sudden sharp pain in his knee, and the brawny man felt his body sinking. Dean, who was a head shorter than him, had to look up to see him. The brawny man was already kneeling on the ground, but his kneeling posture was very strange. His knees were bent back at 90 degrees, and his shoulders were firmly held by Dean's palm, making his body unable to move or stand up. You! The brawny man grimaced in pain. He felt humiliated, but at the same time, he felt a chill. Especially when he saw Dean's indifferent eyes, he felt as if he was being stared at by a beast or tiger. He couldn't believe it. Wasn't the demon race from the abyss? Why were they so strong? He hadn't used the demon's body, but his speed was so fast that it was hard to keep up with him. It seems that the abyss cultivated by the Federation is a fake, Dean said lightly. Letwendy climbed up from the ground and saw Dudian's knees. His face was full of shock, and his body slightly trembled. The shadow of the demon race was engraved in the memory of his generation. At the moment he saw Dudian's ferocious means, it was like confirming the rumors. He wanted to escape immediately. You can't run away. The burly man gritted his teeth and endured the pain in his knees. Cold sweat had already seeped out of his forehead, and he said with a trembling voice, As long as you leave this place, they will immediately kill you, and the Chuangshi god Mecha will also immediately move out to exterminate you. No matter how strong you are, you won't be able to withstand the encirclement of 3 Chuangshi god Mecha. Our army will evacuate the surrounding people as soon as possible, and won't give you the chance to take hostages. Even if you take hostages, it won't affect our judgment. We can completely suppress the deaths of a few people. He said these words in one breath, very smoothly, but after he finished speaking, he couldn't help but feel nervous. After all, his life and death were in the hands of others, and it was all in the hands of others. This kind of feeling could not help but be afraid. Consortium asked you to take me there. What are you going to do? Dean asked. The brawny man was startled. I don't know. I was ordered to take you back to Consortium. You don't know? Dean narrowed his eyes. The Consortium has long known my identity and indulged me to live here. There are always creators' armors on standby and there is a lot of monitoring. Although I seem to be free, but I have been raised in this company. Do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing? The burly man's face changed and he said with a trembling voice, I really don't know. Perhaps only the board members know. No matter what, you can't escape. You might as well surrender. Dean patted his face. It seems that the Consortium has long known that I'm a demon and that I'm an abyss-level demon. But they allowed an abyss demon to live in this bustling city. They aren't afraid that I'll go crazy and kill everyone. It's hard to believe that the Consortium's leader is not only confident but also cold-blooded. He has enough confidence to kill me in this bustling city and doesn't mind the death of some people. It's hard to believe that such a person has good intentions towards me. The brawny man's face turned ugly. What do you want? I want freedom. Dean laughed. The brawny man was stunned. Gotcha. Dean twisted the neck of the brawny man. At the same time, he lowered his head and shot out like lightning. Puff. The moment he lowered his head, 4 lasers shot at him, piercing through the windows outside the building and burning a few black marks on the ground. Right, Wendy, who was next to him, was so frightened that his entire body trembled. When Dean swooped out, he quickly broke through the building. His whole body was demonized, and a pair of wings appeared on his back. He flashed flexibly in the air and rushed to a nearby high-rise building. He saw that there was a restaurant in the high-rise building. The scenery was beautiful, and there were many celebrities sitting there. There was melodious music playing. At the moment, the glass outside the building was broken, and all the tranquility was broken. Dean rushed in and saw a young man wearing a black hat sitting by the window. The young man was holding a metal laser cannon in his hand. Die. Dean swooped down. His splitting blade cut the floor and walls of the restaurant. 2 waiters were standing in the aisle with red wine and plates. Their bodies were cut into 2 pieces by Dean's wings. Chapter 11:29. Dean quickly chased after him. Just as he was about to dive down, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. He braked in time. Less than half a meter in front of him, several laser beams were shot down. It was the other people who were blocking him. Bye-bye. The youth who climbed out of the building saw that Dean was frightened by the laser beams, and his heart was relieved. He grinned and no longer stayed. His body was like a gecko sticking to the glass outside the building, and he quickly climbed into the distance. As long as he kept a distance from Dean, the other people's long-range laser beams would be enough to kill Dean. Puff! Suddenly, a blazing feeling came from his forehead. The youth's smile froze on his face before the thought disappeared from his mind. His eyes were wide open, full of disbelief, indescribable panic and despair. When the world went dark, the body of the youth fell from the building and hit the roadside flower bed, making a loud noise. All the passers-by around were stunned. Dean's eyes were indifferent. He retracted his gaze and turned to the restaurant. Under the panicked and frightened eyes, he broke the window and flew out. Like a giant eagle, he flew over the building and rushed to the rooftop of another building. There were 2 figures, a man and a woman, holding laser cannons. They were wearing sunglasses and dressed very coldly, like killers. Seeing Dean rushing over, there was a trace of panic on their faces. They immediately locked their laser cannons on Dean's body and shot. But Dean's body was erratic in the air. Before they could aim, he had moved away from the scope. After shooting several times, the 2 finally knew that it was impossible to lock Dean's body with laser cannons. After all, it was not a missile, so it could be installed with automatic tracking function. Run! The 2 panicked and fired a few shots to slow down Dean's speed. Then they ran to the other side of the building. They stimulated the demon body. The woman was like a spider, crawling on the ground. Her abdomen became extremely bloated, and a large number of small spiders were ejected from her lower body. These small spiders scattered along the rooftop and quickly pulled a net to intercept Dean. Die! Dean didn't plan to land in the air. His eyes flashed coldly. 2 beams of light suddenly shot out from the bright red gem on his forehead, entering the back of the spider-woman and the neck of the crocodile next to her. Their bodies stopped abruptly and fell forward to the ground. The laser cannons in their arms were thrown out of the rooftop and fell into the street below. Dean didn't stop. His body crossed an arc and rushed towards another building. How is it possible? When the 5 people hiding in the other 3 buildings saw this scene, their faces were filled with shock and disbelief. Under the encirclement of the 8 of them, the target had actually killed 3 of their teammates at lightning speed. It should be known that they were not ordinary people, but super powerhouses who had obtained the power of the demon race. Putting aside external power like Mecha, they were more than enough to look down on the people of the Federation. Since they had obtained the demon's power, they hadn't felt the threat of death for a long time. But at this moment they felt a kind of creepy feeling. They felt a strong killing intent and shadow from the ferocious figure. In contrast, they seemed to have degenerated into ordinary people who could only rely on guns. Even if they had guns, they couldn't aim at the target and kill him. This is not an ordinary abyss demon. In one of the commercial buildings, two snipers looked at Dean, who was rushing to another building. Their faces were full of horror. They tried to aim and snipe, but Dean's figure was like a ghost. He flickered in the scope, and they couldn't lock him. They could only shoot randomly, but all of them were avoided. It seemed that the enemy clearly knew the time and direction of their shots. Hey hey! Headquarters, headquarters! Requesting reinforcements. The enemy is not an ordinary abyss demon. What's the matter? A majestic voice came from the headset. Both of them anxiously reported. The enemy easily killed Myron. He can avoid our laser cannons. He has power beyond the ordinary abyss demon. He has the ability to fly and long-range shooting. He seems to be able to launch laser attack. Moreover, he has a super strong perception ability. After saying so much in one breath, the two of them felt a trace of horror in their hearts. They suddenly discovered that the coverage of the target's magic marks was too wide. Generally speaking, magic marks that were good at perception were naturally weak in the aspect of combat. However, what the target had shown so far seemed to be a comprehensive ability. Every aspect was incomparably powerful. What kind of rare magic marks were these? In contrast, their magic marks were more than a level lower. How is it possible? Chairman, why are you here? What? A series of exclamations came from the earpiece, causing the two of them to be stunned. Soon, the boss took a deep breath and adjusted his breathing. Everyone retreat to the front line and cooperate with the creator's mecha to kill the target. The words were passed to everyone's headset through their communication channel. Even the three dead people could hear the boss's voice. Unfortunately, they couldn't hear it anymore. However, the remaining 5 people, or rather, 4 people, felt relieved after receiving the order and immediately retreated. Retreat? Dean threw away a demonic serpent that had its neck twisted. He glanced at the other 2 buildings where 4 people were in groups of 2. He saw that they were retreating in a hurry. He released his perception to a larger range. He saw that the 3 creators' mechs in the underground emergency tunnel had started to surround them. In addition, all the troops in the tunnel had been dispatched to evacuate the people in the surrounding buildings. Ready to get on the mecha? Dean narrowed his eyes. It was the first time that he had seen a creator's mecha. It was known as the top mecha. It was listed as a 5-star rated by the Federation military. It was said that it could shake the king of the empire and strangle all the abyss demons. At the moment, it rushed out of the emergency tunnel and showed extraordinary speed. It quickly surrounded the building where he was located but didn't immediately attack. The 3 mechas were waiting for the army to evacuate the surrounding people. The longer they delayed, the better it would be for them. Dean didn't rush to attack. He held the laser cannon in his hand and stood on the edge of the rooftop. Under his feet was the abyss of the street. The pedestrians were as small as ants. He quietly looked at the 3 creators' mechas. His brows slightly wrinkled. He wasn't thinking about how to break out of the encirclement of the 3 mechas, but the motive and purpose of the consortium. They had allowed him to stay in the Randy Company for a long time, but now they wanted to kill him because he disobeyed the order. While he was thinking, the surrounding troops had already dismissed many people. Dean also saw Zhang Lanxin and others in the Randy Company's building being escorted by the army to the emergency tunnel. Chapter 1130. You're courting death. Dean's eyes narrowed. He lifted the laser cannon in his hand and fired. The laser beam flew out and pierced through one of the helicopters. The helicopter's propeller blades were broken. It tilted and rolled over. There was a burst of screams as it fell towards a nearby building. When it was about to hit the building, a creator's mecha ejected a large net from its wrist and caught the helicopter. Dean didn't pay attention to him as he turned to shoot at the other helicopters. The helicopters didn't expect that Dean would aim at them, so they panicked and launched laser cannons and missiles to attack. When the missiles were launched, the machete-like wings on Dean's back suddenly shook out a black light, like a black feather, and hit the missile. Bang! The missile was intercepted in mid-air. Whoosh! Dean's body flashed and he dodged away the moment the laser cannon was launched. This laser cannon was not comparable to the laser cannons of the old era. In the old era, the laser guns and cannons couldn't kill the enemy. Especially the laser gun. It could only destroy the enemy's pupils, blind them and lose their combat effectiveness. Although the name was very powerful, the effect on the battlefield was average. But today's laser cannons and laser guns were like the movies of the old era. The laser was like a substance that could penetrate steel plates with high temperature. Moreover, it ignored the weather and could fight all day long. The laser cannons were also countless times stronger. The diameter of the muzzle was about 60 centimeters. It was enough to destroy half of a human's body into ashes. However, although the laser cannon was fast like a flash of lightning, the person who operated it had an ordinary physique. In Dean's eyes, the trigger of the laser cannon was like slow motion. There was enough time for him to predict and dodge. After avoiding the bombardment of several laser cannons, Dean also launched the laser cannon in his hand. Although both were laser weapons, the power of the laser cannon in his hand was obviously stronger. The laser cannon penetrated the head of the helicopter, and the cockpit exploded. The helicopter that lost control also fell, but was rescued by the creator's mecha below, so it didn't directly crash. Dean was carrying a huge laser cannon as he walked through the rain of bullets. Every time he lifted the cannon, an armed helicopter would fall to the ground. After a moment, there were no more helicopters in the sky. Dean stood at the top of the tall building. He could see more than half of the city under his feet. He saw a small aircraft flashing in the distance. It was a camera. It should be a reporter from some nearby news agency or some people with related hobbies. Dean naturally didn't worry about the problem of exposure. Anyway, his identity had been leaked. There was no place for him in the Federation. Even if he hid or fled, he could change his face. At his level of strength, the face was not important. He could change it at any time. What he cared about was the inside. Even for Dean, the inside was not important. He only cared about his heart. If he wanted to further gain strength, this heart full of divinity was also something that must be deprived. It's time to get serious, Dean muttered to himself. At this time, the creator's mecha that caught the fallen helicopter had already settled the several armed helicopters. The people in the helicopters were dispersed. The people who were escorted to the emergency tunnel by the army were also far away from the nearby underground emergency tunnel to avoid being affected by the battle. Only a few panicked and frightened figures were left within a radius of thousands of meters. Dean's eyes fell on the three creators' mecha. The creator's mecha looked like a human. It was extremely huge. It was about 12 meters tall. The whole body was golden. There were wings on the back. Obviously, they had the ability to fly. At first glance, it looked like a golden god. It was tall and majestic. Based on the appearance alone, it was the best among the many mechas. Dean's eyes penetrated the layers and saw the pilots inside the mecha. They were 3 rank 10 warriors. The military put an end to the demons. Even if the demons were cultivated by the Federation, they were either assembled by the Terrace Consortium or sent into the army by the Consortium. He took a deep breath. He didn't wait for the 3 creators' mechas to make a move. He took the lead and ejected a beam of light from the blood-red crystal on his forehead towards the Creator's mecha that had saved the armed helicopters. They were waiting for the army to clean up the battlefield, but Dean couldn't drag this on any longer. The 3 demons in the mecha might not care about the lives of ordinary people, but they would definitely care about the other forces taking the opportunity to attack the Terrace Consortium. It was inevitable that they would have some concerns. The beam of light was so fast that the Creator's mecha didn't have time to react. But when the beam hit 3 meters in front of its head, it suddenly stirred up a ripple. It was an automatic defensive energy shield that blocked the beam of light. Dean's eyes darkened. He raised the laser cannon in his hand and quickly fired. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 7 or 8 laser beams were fired in a row. Without exception, all of them hit the target. Although the god of creation reacted to Dean's finger and muzzle, Dean's aiming speed was too fast. He was 1 step ahead of the god of creation in predicting all the dodging positions. The energy shield outside the Creator's mecha rippled like water. When Dean fired the last shot, the energy shield was broken and the beam hit the mecha's shoulder, leaving a faint burn mark on the golden shoulder armor. Dean narrowed his eyes. The toughness of the Creator's mecha was beyond his expectations. The power of the laser cannon was enough to obliterate all abyssal-level lifeforms. Only some monsters that had evolved special armor or scales could block it. If it was an abyssal-level human, no one would be able to block it without using their demonic body. But at this moment, not even the paint on the surface of the Creator's mecha was wiped off. Of course, maybe the golden color wasn't the paint. Whoosh! Dean threw away the laser cannon that had exhausted its energy plate and swooped down from the tall building. His wings spread out and shot towards the Creator's mecha like a sharp sword. The short-haired young demon in the Creator's mecha sneered. His hands were inserted into 2 white balls, and he was wearing a ring on his head. At this moment, he waved his hands. The arms of the Creator's mecha also waved, but the speed was extremely fast. Coupled with the prediction of the mecha's intelligence system, the punch intercepted the best attack trajectory of Dean's dive. Dean's body suddenly stopped and twisted quickly. The strong momentum made his wings feel like they were being torn, but he temporarily changed his trajectory and turned at a faster speed to the top of the Genesis god's head. For him, this distance was covered in the blink of an eye. Chapter 11:31. Dean didn't meet the blade head-on. He twisted his body again and slid to the shoulder of the creation god mecha. At the moment when he was about to touch the mecha, he felt an unusual sense of danger. His wings suddenly expanded, and the wind filled the inside of his wings in an instant. He stopped his body abruptly. He saw a white light flashing through the gap between him and the creation god mecha's shoulder. Dean saw a creation god mecha next to him shoot a laser from its finger. Holy light strike! A trace of anger flashed across the face of the short-haired young man in the Genesis god mech. He looked coldly at the Genesis god mech that had helped him. Although he was angry, he did not miss this opportunity. The target had already entered the 50-meter radius of the mech's holy light. He immediately used the most violent method to counterattack. Dean was always paying attention to the operators of the 3 creation god mecha through his X-ray vision. When he saw the short-haired youth quickly press the button, he immediately guessed what he was going to do. His eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't retreat but continued to pounce on the ladder. At the same time, he used the Sun Beast gem on his forehead to shoot out beams of light. These beams were not aimlessly scattered, but covered the whole body of the creation god mecha. When the short-haired youth launched the holy light strike, the fingers, shoulders, chest and other armors of the creation god mecha suddenly deformed. From the inside, a dark muzzle-like caliber was exposed. There was a faint light preheating and firing. The whole preheating process was less than 0.1 seconds. However, Dean seemed to have predicted it in advance. When these parts of the armor were removed to expose the firing caliber, the beam of light from his forehead shot into these caliber. In an instant, a violent explosion sounded from the whole body of the creation god mecha. The short-haired youth sitting in the cockpit of the mecha was completely stunned. The violent vibration of the mecha and the shaking screen in front of him made him feel dizzy. He couldn't help but open his eyes wide in disbelief. Break! Dean seized the gap of the explosion and approached in an instant. This time, even the two Genesis god mecha next to him didn't expect such a situation to occur and couldn't act in time. The splitting blades on his body stood up like a tail, turned into sharp blades, and suddenly stabbed out. In an instant, he stabbed thousands of times. The special golden alloy on the surface of the Genesis god mecha was broken, and cracks and holes of different sizes were cut out. Dean roared as he swung his tail blade. It was like a black whirlwind chopper as it slammed into the neck of the creator's mech Kacha. The head of the creator's mech was cut off along with the jumping electric light. Dean quickly tore the fibrous tube in his neck, then shrank his wings and drilled into it. You! The pupils of the short-haired youth shrank to the size of a pinhole as he looked at Dean, who broke into the cockpit from above. His face was full of horror as if he had seen a ghost. Before he could use the devil's body, a sharp blade suddenly shot out from Dean's chest and pierced his head. After doing this, Dean shrank all the blades on his body so as not to cut the surrounding equipment. He pulled up the body of the short-haired youth and threw it along the neck of the mecha. Then he sat down in his seat and glanced at the control board in front of him. Compared to the black lizard mecha he used in the military, this Genesis god mecha was of a higher grade. However, its operating interface was more concise. Unlike the black lizard mecha, there were hundreds of basic keys plus complex keys. This mecha only had a total of 8 keys. It mainly relied on nerves to connect the mecha. Although it was operated by humans, the intelligent system of the mecha would also assist the human brain. It was a combination of human and machine synchronization. It was also the highest crystallization of federal technology. It's worthy to be evaluated as a king's mecha. All the performance is top-notch. Fortunately, I have learned about the operation of the Genesis god mecha before. I have also seen some promotional videos of the Genesis god mecha. Otherwise, the Holy Strike alone would be enough to blow most of my body into ashes. Dean was paying attention to the other two creators' armors while checking the damage of the one he was in. Energy shield charging, need 28 minutes 47 seconds. Weapon system damage 23.7%. 73 laser tubes broken. Do you want to replace? Dean frowned slightly when he heard the words from the intelligent voice. At this moment, he didn't put on the helmet and used nerves to connect to the mecha. The Genesis god mecha had been bound to the short-haired youth. Only the manufacturer had the ability to unlock it. He could only use primitive means to operate it. When he heard the inspection report, he once again felt the horror of the Genesis god mecha. Previously, it had withstood 7 or 8 laser beams to barely penetrate the energy shield. Unexpectedly, it only needed half an hour to repair. As for the damage caused by the Holy Strike, it covered the entire body of the mecha. However, the damage was less than 1/5. This meant that although the Holy Strike was powerful, it wasn't the only attack method of the Genesis god mecha. Moreover, it could be replaced. This endurance is even more terrifying than the king's. I don't know what energy is used to drive the mecha. Even nuclear kinetic energy may not be able to bring such endurance. This thought flashed in Dean's mind. He immediately chose to replace the laser tube. He saw that the joints of the mecha were pulled open. Broken metal fragments were ejected from inside. Soon, the intelligent systems prompt sounded. The laser tube had been replaced. Once again, the Holy Strike could be used. Dean didn't continue to operate. Instead, he looked at the two Genesis god mechas in the distance. Through the outside of the mecha, he could see the expressions of the two people inside. There was a bit of coldness and dignity in them. If I didn't understand this Genesis God mecha and could see the operation inside through the X-ray, I might not be a match for this thing with my strength. Dean looked at the two people who were constantly approaching. His eyes flashed. The reason why he didn't escape at the first moment but braced himself to fight against the three Genesis God mechas was because he knew that if he escaped from the city, he would die faster. At that time, with the force of the Terrace Consortium, they could unscrupulously send more Genesis God mechas to encircle him. They wouldn't have to worry about civilian casualties and excessive damage. But now that he had snatched a Genesis God mecha, he could exert several times his strength. There was no need to continue to fight with these people. Holy strike, divert. Dean's fingers quickly skimmed over the virtual keyboard. The upper and lower body of the mecha suddenly twisted in different directions. A burst of light beams shot out and shrouded the two creators' mechas, one from the front and one from the back. Chapter 1132. After Dean left with the creator's mecha, several officers in a hidden underground tunnel received the news. They raised their hands and clenched their fists to signal the troops to stop. Why don't we go? Let's go. What's going on? Under the protection of the army, many scientists and executives of the Randy Company panicked when they saw the army suddenly stop, and they couldn't help but urge anxiously. Lanxin, is that Qin-mo? Kong Ji, Zhang Lanxin, Chu Huiru, and the other scientists with Level 1 authority stood together. At this moment, when everyone was anxious, Kong Ji was very calm. This old man had a worried look on his face as he asked Zhang Lanxin in a low voice. Zhang Lanxin had a complex expression as she was speechless. Although they had retreated in a hurry, but they had seen the scene of Dudian shooting the helicopter. They had heard the words of the officers, so they knew that it was a demon invasion. But the demon turned out to be Qin-mo. Zhang Lanxin repeatedly recalled the past few months of getting along with him. The enthusiasm, seriousness, concentration and kindness of the young man made her feel that he was impeccable. She really couldn't combine this delicate and pretty face with the fiendish devil clan, but the truth forced her to believe it was true. She couldn't help but think, could it be that there were good and bad devil clan? Everyone be quiet. Amidst the noise and anxiety in the surroundings, a tall and sturdy officer with strong arms roared. After everyone quietened down, he said loudly, "The demon clan has already left this place and went somewhere else. This is the safest place for the time being. Everyone, don't panic. If we continue to retreat, it's hard to guarantee that we won't encounter the demon clan again. Everyone, stay here first and wait for the detailed situation on the surface to come before making a plan." Everyone was relieved as they heard that the demon had left. Some of them patted their chest as if they were relieved. He has left? Kong Ji looked at the sky and seemed to be relieved. Zhang Lanxin noticed his expression, and her heart moved slightly. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. Her old face revealed a trace of gentleness, and she said in an extremely low voice, "Perhaps he is a good demon. I hope he can leave. If he is caught, I hope the higher-ups can give him a chance to change." Chu Huiru's eyes widened as she heard their words. She felt that the two old scientists were crazy. They were worried about a demon. What a pity. I probably won't be able to see him again. Kong Ji's lips curled into a bitter smile. When he noticed that someone was looking at him, his expression immediately became indifferent. Whoosh! The wind was whistling in his ears. In Dean's line of sight, the building under his feet was rapidly moving backward. The two creators' mechs were desperately chasing after him. However, the performance of the mech was the same. Dean rushed out of the encirclement and opened the distance. Although he started the mech's fastest speed, he could only maintain this distance. He couldn't get closer unless the energy of the creator's mech was exhausted. From the intensity of the previous battle, his energy consumption was clearly higher than that of the other two mecha. However, The remaining energy inside was enough to support him charging out of Duyo City and a large distance away from the Federation. Once we get out of the city, we'll go to the demonic creature zone outside the peace circle. Hopefully, we'll find a chance to escape. Dean's eyes were dignified. His mind was quickly thinking of a way to escape, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. It seemed that he had ignored something. At this time, a towering city wall appeared at the end of his line of sight. He had reached the end of Duyo City. I've been running for 3 minutes. During this time, they shouldn't have enough time to mobilize other creators' mechs to surround me. Dean looked at the city wall that was getting closer and closer. His brows gradually wrinkled. He hesitated for a moment, but he still gritted his teeth and pushed the creator's mech. He directly rushed over. There was no absolute strategy. At the critical moment, he still had to take risk. Soon, Dean was close to the city wall. He saw a large number of cannons being mobilized and fired at him. Dean was relieved to see that the city defense weapons had locked onto him. He quickly looked around. He didn't see any other creators' mechs. His heart settled down. He cooperated with the creator's mech's AI system and flexibly flashed among the cannons and lasers. The strength of these attacks was detected by the AI system. Some of the strength could be ignored. He only chose the attacks that were enough to affect his speed and bring damage to the mech. It had to be said that the AI system of the mech was extremely powerful. Even in such a disadvantageous situation, it still picked the best plan. Moreover, it was calculated in minutes and seconds. It was many times faster than human judgment. The creator's mech rushed out of the flames like a golden lightning. The golden mech was like a god. It was unscathed. Its terrifying defense shocked the many soldiers on the city wall. Before they could continue the second wave of firepower, 2 golden beams rushed over. An officer immediately ordered them to let go. Whoosh, whoosh. After the 2 golden beams rushed over, a tsunami-like roar swept from behind. It was as if the whole world was roaring. This was the sound of the wind driven by the mech. Energy, 37%. Dean glanced at the energy display on the mech. It only had 3.5 bars. Things that he had learned during this period of time appeared in his mind. The range and distance of the peace circle, as well as the area it contained, appeared in his mind. He quickly calculated in his mind. Combined with the previous journey and energy consumption, the result was that he could barely rush out of the peace circle. Whoosh! A laser flew over from behind and hit the wings on the back of the mech. It made the mech lose balance and almost slide to the ground. However, the balance system and AI system of the mech quickly adjusted and stabilized the tilt. However, the speed was greatly reduced. Demon Clan, surrender yourselves. A cold woman's voice suddenly came from the communication device in the mech. Dean glanced at the 2 mechs behind him. He saw that it was the woman in one of the mechs who was talking. He frowned slightly. Suddenly, he felt that the bad premonition that he had ignored before emerged again. Stubborn. Prepare to die. The woman saw that Dean ignored her, and a trace of annoyance flashed in her eyes. Dean's face suddenly changed. It was not because of the woman's words, but because he finally realized what he had ignored. Not good. Dean was just about to stand up and rush out of the mech. Suddenly, a tough alloy belt extended from the back of the cockpit chair and firmly tied his body to the cockpit chair. At the same time, the virtual keyboard in front of him automatically shrank and disappeared. The only window became blood red, and the number 3 jumped out. Start self-destruct program. The AI of the mech said in a dull voice. Chapter 1133. Break for me! Dean's hair stood up and he roared. His body crazily grew cutting blades, like messy magic tentacles, and instantly pierced the driver's seat. However, after using too much strength, his heart suddenly pounded madly and violently vibrated. This vibration spread throughout his entire body, as if all the muscles in his body were trembling and contracting along with his heartbeat. Even his consciousness was buzzing and he felt dizzy. Dean's eyes flashed a trace of trance, but in the blink of an eye, he sobered up and waved the sharp blades to cut the alloy belt that bound his body. Bang! The alloy belt was cut by the sharp blades, and it made a harsh sound. What shocked Dean was that the toughness of the alloy belt was beyond his imagination. He had been using the cutting blades for so many years, but he couldn't cut the alloy belt that was less than a centimeter thick. How is it possible? Dean was stunned for a moment. He saw the number on the screen had changed to 2. When he noticed it, the number changed again and changed to 1. His pupils shrank slightly. At this moment, he felt that the blood in his body seemed to flow against the current and burst into his mind. An unprecedented sense of danger made him feel that the time seemed to stop. No, 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 his consciousness shouted. The next moment, the cutting blades all over his body shrank at an unprecedented speed and returned to his body. The whole process took less than half a second. The moment the cutting blades retracted into his body, a strong light emitted from his body. It was dazzling, and the temperature in the cockpit soared. Whoosh! Dean's body melted like magma and flowed out of the alloy belt. Among them, a mass of red mucus rushed out the fastest, and suddenly turned into a sharp blade, rushing along the neck of the mech. The whole process happened in 1 second, as fast as a phantom. When the bright red mucus rushed out of the mech, the scene outside the mech also appeared in Dean's line of sight. He was just about to breathe a sigh of relief, but he was suddenly stunned. Bang! The creator's mech suddenly exploded in mid-air. It was as if a nuclear missile had exploded in mid-air, and the loud sound could be heard for hundreds of miles, even reaching the sky above the nearest city. The debris, smoke, and ash from the explosion spread like a mushroom cloud. The small night rats on the ground nearby were so frightened that they immediately crawled back into their nests, shivering. Before the smoke dissipated, 2 golden flashes of light shot into the mushroom cloud. Half a minute later, the 2 mechs rushed out of the mushroom cloud and stopped in midair nearby. One of the Genesis God mechs had a square energy matrix in its huge mechanical palm. In this energy matrix was a stone ball. It was extremely round, but the surface of the stone ball was covered with cracks. Some of the cracks had collapsed, revealing pits. There's actually still life. The red-haired woman in the mecha sucked in a breath of cold air, her eyes filled with shock. Through the mecha's AI system, she could detect that the stone ball contained heat. Although it was extremely weak, it was still the heat of a living being. This stone ball was the only object at the center of the explosion, and it was clearly the ferocious devil. This is the demonized form of the devil race? How could this be? We seem to have seen him transform into that monster with blades all over his body. Could it be that he can transform into 2 demonic bodies? The middle-aged man in the other mecha was a little shocked, and his gaze became serious. I've never heard of a demon being able to transform into 2 forms. No wonder the higher-ups ordered us to capture him alive. It seems like this demon is somewhat special. The red-haired woman replied through the communicator. After she finished speaking, her gaze once again landed on the stone ball, and she said, "This demon's defense is too terrifying to actually be able to survive the self-destruction of the Genesis God mech. Moreover, we used an energy matrix to bind the surroundings of the mech, compressing the explosive energy into the matrix. It's hard to imagine how powerful the explosion inside was. Not only did he not turn into ashes, he actually survived." The middle-aged man nodded slightly when he heard this. There was some fear in his eyes as he said, "Let's go. Send him back as soon as possible to avoid any complications." "All right." The red-haired woman nodded. "Let's leave this place for the people behind to clean up. There shouldn't be anything missing." After the 2 of them finished speaking, they drove their mecha back and left. After flying for less than 1,000 meters, they met 2 Genesis god mechs that were rushing over. Including the 3 from before, there were a total of 5. This was Terrace's foundation. In order to capture a demon, they had sent out 5 Genesis god mechs at once. The performance of each mech was comparable to the king of the empire. 10 minutes later, the 2 mechs flew back to a desert on the outskirts of Duyo City. This desert was surrounded by a stone wall, and the entire desert was enclosed. There were windmills, power stations, and solar panels everywhere in the desert. There were also some strange white birds and patrolling soldiers in black uniforms. If one looked closely, they would also discover that there were tiny black insects crawling on some of the plants in the desert. However, the carapaces of these insects shone with a metallic luster. They were mechanically constructed scouting insects that could be found all over the desert. This desert was also one of the main bases of the Terrace Financial Group. The 2 mechs stopped in front of an ancient castle-like building complex in the middle of the desert. There were many soldiers in black uniforms stationed outside the building complex. There were a few chariots parked inside the ancient castle, and there was also a large shed that covered an area of thousands of square meters. There were various types of mechs lined up inside. "It's us. Open the door." The red-haired lady connected to the base's communication screen. Her figure also appeared on the virtual projection of the base. The door in front of the ancient castle quickly opened. She controlled the mech and arrived in front of a building beside the ancient castle. This building looked like the dorsal fin of a fish. There were many strange buildings with sharp spikes. At the bottom was a deep and huge entrance that looked like a giant mouth. The red-haired lady and the mech transported the stone orb into the deep and huge entrance, and they arrived at the base below the ancient castle. The 2 of them sat in the mech. After going through many layers of identity verification, they arrived at the lowest level of the base. There were many people standing on a high platform. They seemed to be waiting for the 2 of them, and they had already prepared a cage. This cage was a huge square energy barrier that was about 10 meters long. At this moment, after the red-haired lady sent the stone orb in the mech's hand into the energy barrier, the entire energy barrier instantly solidified. Outside the energy barrier, another 5 energy barriers were erected, making a total of 6 energy barriers. They stacked on top of each other, trapping the stone orb within. There were 6 grooves on the alloy floor below the energy barrier. Every energy barrier rose from the grooves and formed in midair. Chapter 1134. While everyone was talking about the stone orb, a slender middle-aged man walked over. He was wearing a black robe with gold embroidery. He looked like a priest in a church, but he also looked like an old gentleman. His gestures were full of etiquette and elegance. Seeing this middle-aged man appear, everyone was shocked and quickly said, "Chairman." Black slowly nodded slightly. His eyes jumped over everyone and looked at the stone orb in the huge energy shield in front of the high platform. He was startled for a moment and frowned. "This is the demon?" Everyone looked at each other and no one answered. At this time, the red-haired woman in the cockpit jumped down and landed below the high platform. She bowed her head and said, "Reporting to the chairman, this is the demon you want us to arrest. He is very fierce and has killed many of our companions in a row. He has shown extraordinary abilities in hand-to-hand combat. I suspect that he has 2 different magic mark abilities. Fortunately, the AI had already arranged a plan for us to ambush him. He was successfully fooled and snatched a Genesis god mech. The AI detonated the mech and seriously injured him." When Black Slody heard the words AI, his eyelids slightly twitched, but no one noticed. After the red-haired woman finished speaking, he continued to ask, "Then why is he a stone now?" Alicia whispered, "Although he looks like a stone, this should be caused by his magic mark ability. I speculate that he should have activated this ability at the moment when the Genesis god mech exploded. His whole body petrified and increased his defense to the maximum. However, The power of the Genesis God Mech's explosion is no less than a nuclear weapon. Although he barely survived, he should have fainted at the moment. His mind is not clear, but his body is instinctively maintaining magic power. When he wakes up, he should return to his human appearance. Hearing her words, Black Slowdy nodded slightly to show that he understood. The other higher-ups behind him had a look of realization. They thought that this demon that Black Slowdy paid attention to was originally a stone, which was why he was so special. "Chairman, can you give this monster to me?" An old man wearing thick glasses asked with a hint of respect and fanaticism. He was not tall and had a hunchback, so he looked even shorter in the crowd. However, when the people around him heard his words, they looked at him with some fear. "Chairman, Elisa said that this monster may have two kinds of magic marks. If it's true, then once I study the secrets of his body, the combat power of the demons we produce will be greatly increased. This is an excellent experimental material. I hope Chairman can give it to us." Another old man in a white robe said. He was skinny, and only the whites of one of his eyes remained, making him look somewhat frightening. When the other upper echelons heard the two of them snatching the demon clan, they all revealed mocking smiles as if they were watching a show. Among them, there were a few people who revealed undetectable sneers, as if they were mocking them for overestimating themselves. When Alicia heard the old man say the word "give birth," her fingers curled slightly, but she quickly loosened them. However, a hint of anger and killing intent flashed through her eyes. "Stop arguing." Black Slowdy frowned slightly, interrupting the two of them. He said, "This demon clan is to be handed over to the higher-ups. It's not something you can touch." The higher-ups? The crowd was stunned when they heard Black Slowdy's words. Then, their expressions changed. Black Slowdy was the chairman of the Terrace Financial Group. Even the other directors of the financial group with high statuses would have to nod in approval in front of him, and he also had the right to fire the other directors. As the person with the highest status in the Terrace Financial Group, it could be said that even the chairman of the Federation would have to greet him when they met. After all, the ordinary citizens might not know, but they knew that most of the previous chairmen of the Federation had been supported by the Terrace Financial Group. They had people in the military and other departments. As long as Black Slowdy was willing, he could even dismiss a chairman. In the entire Federation, the ones who truly held the lifeline and power were the four large financial groups. And the Terrace Financial Group was the most powerful financial group among the four large financial groups. There was probably only one person that Black Slowdy referred to as the higher-ups. Thinking of the existence of that person, the crowd fell silent. They looked at each other, and no one spoke again. The two old men who had already thought of a way to argue shut their mouths in embarrassment. They looked at each other, feeling very awkward. "Let's do a test on him first. Don't let him die of weakness," Black Slowdy instructed. Rudy ordered, "Everyone else disperse. Don't tell anyone about this matter, lest it causes unnecessary negative effects." "Yes, Chairman." The crowd responded. Some left, some went to find a technician to test the stone orb in the energy barrier, while the rest waited where they were. This level was where they worked, and it was clear that they could not leave Black Slowdy behind to attend to the matters at hand. Soon, the test report of the stone orb was out. Terrace equipment could completely analyze the stone orb through the energy barrier. It could even detect the blood type. There was no need to draw blood for testing, and the data obtained would not be wrong. "Chairman, this stone orb is indeed that demon. He still has a weak life force. Look at his body, his heart is still beating weakly." A bespectacled middle-aged man passed a set of pictures to Black Slowdy. Black Slowdy casually flipped through the pictures. They were pictures of the interior of the stone orb. He could see the outlines of flesh and bones within the stone orb, as well as organs such as a skull and intestines. The most eye-catching thing was a golden heart. Seeing this strange scene, Black Slowdy frowned slightly. He felt a little uncomfortable. The interior of the stone orb looked like a ball of minced meat mixed with bones and organs. It was as if it was stuffed with minced corpses. It's good that he's not dead. He returned the pictures to the middle-aged man and asked, "Is his life in danger? Does he need treatment?" The middle-aged man felt a little awkward. This was the first time he had seen such a youth, and he could not be sure. However, since the chairman had asked, he did not dare to answer directly. After thinking for a moment, he could only say, "Chairman, if you want him to live, you still need to treat him." Black slowly said, "Then treat him. Also, wake him up as soon as possible." "Yes, Chairman," the middle-aged man said. In the cold darkness, in a trance, Dean felt a faint warmth spreading throughout his body. Surrounded by this warmth, he felt his consciousness become a little clearer. He was no longer in a trance, and he was no longer stimulated by the intense pain. He opened his eyes and saw an almost transparent energy shield. Outside the energy shield was a huge room, and there were many people walking in the room. From the way they were dressed, they looked like researchers. Some of them were pointing in his direction and saying something, and the assistants beside them were recording what they were saying in a notebook. Dean was startled. The next moment, the memories flowed back like a tide. The explosion, the countdown, the heat wave, the mecha, the alloy belt, the blue sky, the square energy matrix, all the pictures suddenly shrank back to his brain. He could not help but shiver. He took a deep breath and looked down at his body. But as he looked down, he found that his appearance was a bit strange. It was a round stone orb. The memory fragments flashed. The moment the explosion spread out, he stimulated the magic marks of the tortoise and petrified his whole body. In addition to the basic petrification, he shrunk his body into the shape of a ball. So he turned into a stone orb, because the spherical shape was the best way to remove the force. "I'm not dead. I'm still alive?" Dean was relieved, but then his mood became gloomy again. He was caught after all. He did not know what the other party wanted to do with him, but it was definitely not just to kill the demon race. At this time, Dean saw that several researchers seemed to have noticed his situation and exclaimed. Then more people turned to look at him. For a moment, he felt like an orangutan in the zoo, and a special orangutan, so he was surrounded by exclamations. Since he was noticed, Dean did not continue to pretend to sleep. He slowly stretched his body and returned to his human appearance. This time, he felt that part of his body's potential was stimulated. When he broke free from the alloy belt, he used the ability of the sun beast to melt his whole body. This ability was not simply the ability of the sun beast, but more like the ability of the extreme ice worm. The extreme ice worm would not die even if it was cut into countless pieces. As long as it was given time, it would attract and reunite with each other and restore its whole body again. The moment he rushed out of the mecha, he also had this ability. He felt that he could control all parts of his body, every organ, and even every cell. This feeling was very magical. It should be known that ordinary people had very poor control of their own body. For example, it was difficult to make the eyeballs rotate in 2 different directions. Most people could not even control their ears, let alone control their stomach wriggling, intestines twisting, heart beating, lungs breathing, and so on. Dean slowly got up and felt his body. Then he slowly walked to the front of the energy shield. He raised his hand, and his arm gradually turned into a dark, sharp blade. But it was only the limited demonization of his arm. He slashed at the energy shield. Bang! The sharp blade pierced through the energy shield, but there was another energy shield outside. When it pierced the second layer of the energy shield, it was stopped. The next moment, the energy shield that was pierced quickly healed. Dean quickly retracted his sharp blade arm. When it retracted to the tip of the blade, he deliberately paused for a moment. The healed energy shield was like a laser, cutting off the fingernail-sized blade. Sure enough, During the battle and the time when I was in a coma, my body was examined in detail. I could barely pierce through one layer of this energy shield. There are 6 grooves underground. If I want to pierce through 6 layers of energy shields, I don't know if I can condense the strongest sun-beast ray. But there isn't such strong light here to borrow. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the energy shield. Obviously, it was not possible to escape from here. Moreover, since the enemy had captured him, they should not be slowly raising him. Otherwise, they would not suddenly summon him. What is the purpose of capturing me? Dean frowned. He could not figure it out. Suddenly, he felt that he should not be thinking without a clue. The enemy knew his identity as a demon. This was the root of the problem. Thinking of this, he immediately began to comb through the matter from the moment he killed Su Ming and stole his mecha to sneak into the Federation. While Dean was thinking, the staff outside the energy shield called Jasaloti and reported to him. Jasaloti looked at Dean, who was sitting cross-legged in the energy shield. It was indeed the same as in the previous photo. He nodded and ordered everyone to leave. No one was allowed to enter without his permission. Soon all the staff left. You also leave, Jasaloti said to the guards. Chapter 1135. Dean was aware of the situation outside the energy shield. He looked up and saw Sislodi at a glance. He was the most powerful chairman of the Terrace Consortium. He was even one of the most powerful figures in the entire Federation. It was no wonder that he could recognize him at a glance. This person was too famous. His popularity was no different from that of the Federation's chairman. Even a child who had just entered primary school could know his appearance and identity from the news, parents' conversations, cartoons, and other aspects. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at him quietly. He seemed to have an idea of what he was thinking. After everyone left, Leslodi looked at Dean, who was looking straight at him from within the energy shield. Being stared at by the latter, he felt an inexplicable chill. He had not experienced this feeling for a long time. Only the Lord God had a stronger chill and majesty than this. Dean gave him the feeling that he was a fierce beast that would pounce on him at any time. Although Dean's eyes were very calm and tranquil, and there were 6 energy shields to isolate him, this feeling still made his hair stand on end, and his heartbeat could not help but slightly accelerate. Was this a real demon? His eyes flashed slightly. He didn't immediately start the instrument but said, "You don't seem surprised." "What are you surprised about?" Dean asked. Sislodi smiled. Since the other side didn't understand his meaning, he didn't intend to explain, so he said, "Nothing. Shouldn't you be surprised that the one who caught me is you, the boss of the Terrace Consortium?" Dean said lightly. Sislodi's eyebrows slightly raised. "You expected it to be me? You have the right to let me enter Randy's company to get the highest authority, and you can mobilize 3 Genesis God mechas to surround me. You even sacrificed 1 Genesis God mecha to self-destruct. Besides you, who else has the qualifications?" Dean smiled lightly. Sislodi glanced at the young man and suddenly felt that the latter's age seemed to be a mystery. This calmness and confidence were not like a young man under the age of 30 who had just integrated into society. "Then guess why I asked you to come here?" Sislodi said with interest. Dudian indifferently said, "Since I have fallen into your hands, then I don't care what you do." But he didn't expect this young demon to be so cautious and mature. He knew that it was useless to say more. He didn't want to be perceived by the Lord. He no longer paid attention to Dean and said to the huge computer on the side, "Sir, the people have been dismissed." Dean saw Lancelot's sudden action. Even though he was always calm, he couldn't help but be stunned. But in the next second, the broken thoughts in his heart instantly connected. The thought made his heart beat fiercely. His pores contracted and he felt an indescribable chill. At this time, the complex structure of the computer started to operate. At the same time, Dean suddenly saw a light screen shining from the outside about 3 meters in front of him. It turned into a virtual human figure. The figure gradually solidified. The whole body was bathed in hazy light. It was like a virtual projection of a god. The technology of this virtual projection was extremely advanced, and the projected image gradually became no different from a real person. When he saw the face of this person, Dean was stunned again. He looked at the person in disbelief. This was an Eastern face. He had only seen it 2 or 3 times, but he would never forget it, because this person's face was very handsome. He was as perfect as a god. His identity was so noble that it was unimaginable. He was called the God of Science and Technology by the Federation. The God of Science and Technology had obviously expected Dean's reaction. He just smiled and said, "You also go back." He didn't turn around. His back was facing Lancelot. His tone was commanding, which showed his supreme status. Lancelot didn't show the slightest anger. His face was very humble. His previously straight back was slightly bent. He respectfully responded and then looked at Dean in front of him. He turned and walked down the platform. He left the bottom of the base. When the alloy door closed, only Dean and the God of Science and Technology were left in this huge base. The sound of the door closing was very empty. "You're not dead," Dean blurted out after the shock. The God of Science and Technology smiled. "It's impolite to greet others for the first time." "It shouldn't be the first time we've met, right?" Dean said. The God of Science and Technology faintly smiled. "It's not wrong to say that. You have seen my sculpture and seen my appearance. Now I'm just a projection. It's no different from a sculpture. So it's not the first time we've met." Dean didn't have the leisure to entangle with these issues. He immediately asked, "Aren't you a person from 300 years ago? No one can live for 300 years, right? Did you freeze your body for a period of time? Or did you have a head transplant operation?" The God of Science and Technology didn't become impatient in the face of Dean's series of questions. He smiled. "You said that no one can live for 300 years. But I'm not a person." Dean was startled. His face slightly changed as he thought of the God of Science and Technology. "Do you know why I'm looking for you?" The God of Science and Technology smiled. Dean's eyes lit up as he shook his head. "I don't know. But it shouldn't be to dissect me or to get information about the Empire from me. After all, the Federation and the Empire have a long history of war. They have long understood these things thoroughly. Even if they really catch the current king of the Empire, it is estimated that they won't disturb people at the level of Basil Slody, let alone you." The God of Science and Technology laughed. "That's right. I'm looking for you because your identity is different from anyone else." "My identity?" "Yes, the same identity as me." Dean was startled once again. His first reaction was not to doubt the falsehood of Dudien's words. Instead, he was pleasantly surprised and even honored. However, this thought was dispelled in an instant and was replaced by an unspeakable horror. He pretended to be puzzled and confused as he asked, "Same identity as you? Could it be that I'm also a god? How come I don't know about this?" The God of Science and Technology revealed a mysterious smile. "You are not a god but a demigod." "Demigod?" "Yes, your body has the potential of a god. Do you remember the first time you opened your eyes and saw the world after you were born?" Dean's mind was filled with the images that Crimson Moon had seen when she looked at his memories. Those images had long been forgotten by him. But Crimson Moon's magic mark ability brought them back to him. Every year, every day, the images clearly emerged in his mind. He couldn't help but clench his fists. He felt an indescribable pain. Chapter 1136. The God of Science and Technology observed Dean's reaction, and a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. Although he asked, he didn't think that Dean remembered when he was born, but from Dean's reaction, it was obvious that he knew something. The god of science and technology became more interested. Look at you, it seems that you already know your identity. Then you should also remember your maker, right? Hearing the word maker, Dean's body trembled slightly. There was a strong anger that he wanted to vent, but this time the person he was facing was not Crimson Moon or Burrow, but the god of science and technology that he couldn't see through. He knew that even if he continued to deny or even deceive himself so that he wouldn't think about those images, it was already meaningless. When Crimson Moon looked through his memory, he saw all the images after he opened his eyes. Although he was in the device at that time and couldn't hear the voices of his parents, he had already read their communication from their lips when they spoke, and he also knew his true identity. A hope that was created. At least in the mouth of his parents, he was Hope, a new form of human evolution, also known as a new human being. And his smart and lovely sister, who was very good to him, was also an experimental subject. But in comparison, he was more perfect. This was also why when the unexpected natural disaster came, he was chosen as a survivor and slept in the freezer. Although he also didn't know why in the eyes of his parents, his sister, who was far more beautiful and intelligent than him, wasn't as perfect as him. What was their definition of a new human being? He had never thought about this because he didn't want to think about it, and continued to bury this memory in the deepest part of his heart. Because once he figured it out, he would only get sadness in the end. Seeing that Dean fell into silence, the god of science and technology wasn't angry. He smiled and said, "There aren't many gods' fetuses in this world, and you should be one of the few left. Maybe 1 or 2 gods' fetuses can be found in the Fire Dragon country in the north. As for the empire where you live, maybe the emperor is also a god's fetus, but it's too difficult to catch them. On the contrary, you are obviously a god's fetus, but your strength is pitifully weak. If I'm not wrong, you should have been chased by that emperor, right?" Dean recovered from his sorrowful thoughts. He couldn't help but be startled when he heard the words. He didn't understand. However, the divine fetus, in his words, was obviously referring to himself. As for the Fire Dragon country, it reminded him of the Fire Dragon race in the east of the Empire. However, it was located in the upper northeast of the Federation. As for the Emperor, he was a little surprised. From Felicia, he learned that the Empire was ruled by 7 kings and the power was divided. But in the eyes of the god of science and technology, there seemed to be no mention of kings. As for his strength, although he wasn't a real king, at least he had to use 3 creators' mechas, which were comparable to the performance of kings, to capture him. This was already the top of the human race, but he was described as pitifully weak. Even if the kings of the Empire were much stronger than him, there wasn't much difference. Did this mean that the god of science and technology didn't care about the kings at all? If this was the case, then the emperor he was talking about was most likely the real ruler of the empire. As for the theory that the 7 kings were respected by Felicia, it should be because her status was too low to know about the existence of the emperor. And this emperor might not be the emperor of the empire, but he might be the emperor of the empire, but he was very reserved, so the people thought that the emperor was just an empty shell, and the real powerhouses were the 7 kings. He said that the emperor is a god's fetus, and has the same identity as me. He also said that I would be hunted down, which means that there is a struggle between the god's fetuses. So he is also a god's fetus, and the purpose of capturing me is not simple. No matter if I go to the Empire's capital or the Federation, I will be detected and captured because I am the weakest among the god's fetuses. Dean's mind instantly thought of these, and he felt a little scared. This world was more dangerous than he had imagined, and he was ignorant before. If he had rashly gone to the Empire when he was weak, he would have been captured by the Emperor, kept as a pet, or killed. The god of science and technology saw that Dean was slightly surprised and silent, as if he had said what he was thinking, but he just smiled and said, "Compared to the other gods' fetuses, you are the strangest one I have seen. There are traces of dormancy in your genes. If I am not wrong, you should be the first batch of God's fetuses 300 years ago. But soon after you were born, the Earth was invaded by extraterrestrial magic insects, which led to the collapse of all countries. As a God's fetus, you were placed high hopes on by humans, so you were frozen. When you woke up from the frozen state, the world had changed beyond recognition. That is why you are so weak, right?" Dean's pupils shrank. Even if he wanted to control his emotions, he couldn't help but feel a trace of horror and even a little creepy. The god of science knew him in more detail than he did. If it wasn't for the experience of Crimson Moon looking through his memory, he wouldn't have known his true identity. But none of this escaped the god of science's eyes, and he even knew that he had entered the frozen chamber. Is this the ability of God? Seeing Dean's shocked expression, the god of science and technology knew that he had hit the nail on the head. He smiled and said, "If that is the case, everything can be explained." Dean calmed down and stared at him. He said, "What is a god's fetus? Are you also one of the god's fetuses? What is the purpose of the existence of the god's fetuses?" This is a story from a long time ago. The god of science and technology did not refuse to answer. Instead, he said softly, "From the moment humans were born, we have been fighting against the heavens and the earth, nature and beast. Perhaps this is what all life will face, from the blue whale in the ocean to the tiny ant, a microorganism or a bacterium. It is the same, living in the midst of fighting. And the purpose of the struggle is to survive. After countless years of reproduction and inheritance, humans have long evolved from the original era of mushroom hair drinking blood to the civilized era. Survival is not a difficult thing for most people. They don't need to fight for food with beasts in the wilderness, and they won't die because of battle injuries, decay and infection. In the civilized era, survival is a basic need, and it is the bottom line that society gives to everyone. However, the hierarchy of human society is not equal. The so-called everyone is equal, and the emperor is the same as the common people, but these are just words to comfort the people. The people pursue basic needs of food, and the people with status pursue enjoyment. Money and power can bring the ultimate enjoyment experience, but these can't stop one thing. Chapter 1137. Dean quietly listened to him, but his mind was thinking about other things. The god of science and technology seemed to be narrating an ancient story, his voice distant. When survival becomes a basic need, people will desire more things. Enjoyment, endless enjoyment. All life longs for immortality. But there is no immortal life in this world. Even the stars in the universe have their own lifespan. Many huge, celestial bodies in the universe also have their end. Although there is no possibility of immortality from a rational point of view, people are still willing to live longer. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years. Dean frowned. Do you mean that the purpose of creating the gods' fetuses was to find a way to let humans live longer? And we are the test subjects? You are only half right. The god of science and technology smiled. The gods' fetuses are the evolved version of human beings. They have the adaptability and the ability to evolve beyond human beings. If the world wasn't invaded by the magic insects and the earth was still the same, then the lifespan of the divine fetuses like us would be double that of ordinary people. Of course, if we exercise, then we will become the top athletes. So it doesn't seem that powerful, Dean said. The god of science and technology said, that is because of the limitations of the times. In today's cataclysm, the Empire uses the magic insects to evolve itself. At this time, the speed of evolution of the gods' fetuses will be reflected. We will soon reach the top and become the strongest evolvers. Dean was startled for a moment, but he understood. The so-called gods' fetuses were the best group of people in the same era. The purpose of creating the gods' fetuses in the old era was to improve the genes of all human beings to a better level so that they could gradually replace the original human genes. Then through the inheritance, the human society would be greatly improved. Whether it was lifespan, intelligence, physical fitness or other aspects, then the development of science and technology would be like a butterfly effect. If Einstein could live for another 50 years, then perhaps the olden era would have advanced by more than 10 years, let alone the fact that all of the other great scientists had their lifespans extended. The benefits they brought were unimaginable. The god of science and technology looked at Dudian. You were born in the old era and should be regarded as the earliest batch of God's fetuses. Your body structure is no different from ours, but the meaning of our birth is different. You are for the reproduction of mankind and represent the hope of mankind. We carry the ultimate hope of all life. That is eternal life. Dean's heart skipped a beat. Are you not born in the old era? The god of science and technology smiled and said, When I was born, the old era had already been destroyed, and the cataclysm era had entered. The person who made me was not these human scientists, but the extraterrestrial magical insect. These words were earth-shattering. Dean's pupils shrank. He was completely stunned. Demonic insects created you? How was this possible? The demonic insect knew how to make a divine fetus? If it was the demonic insect that created you, then wouldn't this place have already fallen into the hands of the demonic insect? Dean couldn't help but ask. The god of science and technology smiled. Since you can become the abyss, it means that your body has already absorbed the real demonic insect and not the offspring of the parasitic demonic insect. Since you have absorbed the demonic insect, then you should know that their level of technology is not inferior to our Earth. Otherwise, they wouldn't have crossed the galaxy and invaded our Earth. After all, the humans in the old era couldn't even walk out of the solar system. Dean thought of the ice worm king that he had caught. It was in a demonic insect spaceship. These disgusting demonic insects had no hands and feet and looked like slimy white loaches. However, their intelligence was not inferior to humans. It wasn't difficult for them to infiltrate into the human society, to understand the history and development of mankind, and to master human technology. So, you are a puppet controlled by the demonic insect? Dean looked at the god of science and technology coldly, but his heart was a bit gloomy. The 7 kings of the empire were controlled by the demonic insects, and the Federation had fallen. How could there be a real Pure Land for humans on this earth? The god of science and technology shook his head and revealed a mocking smile. These demonic insects are smart, but they underestimated me. Do you know why I am meeting you in this form? What do you mean? Dean looked at the illusory figure of the god and his heart trembled. He knew that his guess was confirmed. The god of science and technology looked at him but didn't continue. He looked up and slowly said, Soon, the blood moon will come and the demonic insects will make a comeback. Before they come again, I must master a higher power. In other words, I must become a real god. Only in this way can I survive. Dean didn't expect that he would use the word survive on himself. For the civilians of the Federation, survival might be a problem that they had to face every day. But the god of science and technology was the faith of the Federation. His status was countless times more honorable than the chairman. But even such a high and mighty person was planning for survival. Moreover, the blood moon will come, that the god of science and technology said made his heart jump. He vaguely remembered something. Crimson Moon once said that the reason why she changed her name to Crimson Moon was that when she was born, the blood moon was hanging in the sky. At that time, he didn't take it seriously. He only thought that Crimson Moon's memory had deviated when she was born. After all, how could the moon be blood red? However, the god of science and technology also said so, which undoubtedly confirmed that Crimson Moon's words were not exaggerated but true. If the demonic insects will come when the moon turns blood red, doesn't it mean that when Crimson Moon was born, the demonic insects visited Earth once? No, this doesn't seem to be the main problem. The main problem is that the big countries of the old era joined forces but failed to completely wipe out the demonic insects from the Earth. How could they make a comeback? Seeing Dean's bewildered expression, the god of science and technology faintly smiled and said, "In the old era, countries launched nuclear weapons and dropped hydrogen bombs all over the world. Although the Earth was bombed beyond recognition, the technology of the demonic insects wasn't weak. The information was transmitted almost instantaneously. When the nuclear weapons were used in the war, the demonic insects were already prepared. But the demonic insects didn't expect that the power of the nuclear weapons would be so terrifying. The nuclear equivalent that humans had accumulated was so large that it was enough to overturn all the land on the surface of the Earth. When the nuclear weapons were detonated, the demonic insects were hit hard, but not all of them were destroyed. The rest of them were scared and fled the Earth. Unfortunately, some of the demonic insects on Earth, who were at the outer edge of the nuclear explosion, survived. Through the communication of the spaceship, they contacted the demonic insects that escaped and called them back. That's why you can see the current state of the world." Dean was startled. He didn't expect such a tortuous thing to happen in the middle. He couldn't help but feel sad. If those escaped demonic insects weren't recalled, would the Earth be a different scene? "What do you mean by telling me this?" Dean frowned. He took a step back and made a defensive posture. The god of science and technology quietly looked at him. "Nothing much. Probably because I haven't been with the same kind for a long time. So I want to talk to you. By the way, I hope you can understand my thoughts. If we don't become a real god, then humans will completely become the food of the demonic insect. This is the only way to save all of humanity." Dean's face sank. "What is the purpose of you capturing me? Do you want me to be your companion? Help you conquer the Empire and unify the world? Then fight against the demonic insects?" There was a trace of contempt in the god's eyes. "Although you are my kind, but you are not qualified to be my companion. Moreover, I don't need the help of others to conquer the world. I alone am enough." Dean didn't get angry because of the god's contempt. He calmly asked, "In that case, you didn't catch me just to talk to me, right?" The god of science and technology smiled. "I wanted to give you more time to grow and make your body more perfect. Unfortunately, time waits for no man. The blood moon is coming and there isn't much time left. This time all the gods' fetuses have matured and it's time to pick them. If you miss this opportunity, then it will be difficult for you to make a comeback. So are you willing to sacrifice yourself for the sake of humanity?" Dean felt that the god's words were a bit strange and ridiculous. "You know that I was created. What does it have to do with me to save all of humanity?" Chapter 1138. Dean didn't comment, but he was secretly awestruck. Finally, he knew why the god of science had caught him. "There are only two of us here. Just say what you want to do. Don't you find it boring to say these high-sounding words?" Dean said bluntly. He was not afraid of angering the god of science. With their status, they could not do things based on anger and personal preferences. They could only vent occasionally. The god of science and technology smiled. He was not angry, nor did he make any gestures. Suddenly, a few robots moved outside the energy shield. Their eyes flashed with blue light. They moved some instruments outside the energy shield. Then, at the bottom of the alloy platform inside the energy shield, a metal platform slowly rose. It was like a school lecture platform. Dean looked at this scene and narrowed his eyes. While he was thinking, a strong electric current suddenly came from the ground. Caught off guard, his feet were instantly sucked to the ground. The electric currents spread all over his body. He screamed, but before he could resist, he fainted directly. His eyes turned white and he lost consciousness. The god of science and technology looked at Dean, who had fainted on the ground, with an indifferent expression. He saw that the metal platform was opened like a cabinet. There were 2 eyeball-like holes inside, from which 2 black lines stretched out like a living snake. They stretched toward Dean and connected to the temples on both sides of his brain. In the coma, countless information suddenly poured into his brain, waking Dean up from his coma. The colorful information was like a dream when he was in a coma. When he woke up, he saw 2 black lines stretching from the metal platform like 2 weird arms. His pupils shrank. He quickly raised his hand to pluck out the 2 black lines. He took a few steps back and looked at the god of science and technology in front of him with vigilance. "What do you want to do?" Dean's face was gloomy. The god of science and technology smiled. "I just want to implant a small virus in you." Dean frowned slightly. He knew that the god of science and technology had not finished his words. For example, what was the purpose of implanting the virus? To kill him? If Zhang Xian wanted to kill him, there was no need to go through so much trouble. Zhang Xian only needed to double the previous electric current to electrocute him to death. While he was puzzled, the information in his mind that was as messy as a dream quickly occupied his brain. There seemed to be many voices shouting, and many faces flashed across his vision. The shouting increased exponentially, completely swallowing up his other thoughts. He had no energy left to think about anything else. He could not help but hold his head and shout, trying to drown out all the voices in his mind. His roar was angry and lacerated, like a trapped beast. His roar lasted for a quarter of an hour before he stopped. It was as if he had used up all the energy in his body. He panted heavily and then felt an inexplicable sense of emptiness and confusion. Although the voice in his mind gradually weakened, he could not help but feel a sense of emptiness. He looked up at the god of science and technology in front of him and felt a little unfamiliar. He did not know who this was. Then he looked around at the strange energy shield and the strange room. He asked blankly, "Where is this?" The god of science and technology looked at Dean's dull eyes and smiled. Through the psychological books that countless psychology masters had entered into the brain, the god of science and technology's observation of subtle expressions and psychological analysis was far beyond the top psychology masters of the Federation. At a glance, he could see that Dean was not lying or pretending. This was completely within his expectations because he didn't think that any human could resist the virus that he had personally programmed. If this virus was put into the core database of any consortium in the Federation, it would be enough to paralyze the database. How could the computing power and capacity of the human brain be compared with the core database of the 4 consortia? It was like a grain of sand and the bright moon in the sky. The difference was more than billions of times. However, this virus would not destroy Dean's brain. The virus would only destroy all the data in a memory, devour it, and then turn it into the most primitive data scramble. Then, it would gradually empty all the information in the memory, and let the memory become zero. In his eyes, there was not much difference between a human and a robot. For him, the human brain was just a core database. The so-called memory was just a piece of data. He had the ability to create a robot that was completely no different from a human, but the computing power and IQ was 100 times that of a human. It had autonomous emotions, thinking, logic, and could create itself. This was where his strength came from. The god of science and technology slowly walked towards Dean. The latter saw that the god of science and technology was approaching. His mouth was slightly open and slightly squirming, but he only made vague sounds. It seemed that he had lost the ability to speak. When the god of science and technology completely stood in front of Dean, the latter was already like a fool, sitting on the ground in a daze. His eyes were open, but there was no spirit. The god of science and technology knew that the virus in Dean's mind had completely multiplied in an instant and completely devoured his thoughts. Language, body movements, and even instincts had been devoured. The virus that the god of science and technology had personally written was not an exaggeration to say that it was the #1 virus in the Federation. Except for him, no one could solve it. However, in front of the god of science and technology, even the most powerful virus was just an ant that could be destroyed with one blow. After all, in the virtual world, he was the god. Unfortunately, his omniscient and omnipotent power could only be exerted to the extreme in the virtual world. That was why he needed a perfect carrier. And this first batch of God's fetuses created in the old era was undoubtedly the most suitable carrier. With his ability, he could completely restore this carrier to the strength of his previous body as soon as possible, or even surpass it. If you were willing to surrender, you could have kept your consciousness and transferred it to the most powerful mech, making you my most capable subordinate. Unfortunately, you've missed this opportunity, the god of science and technology said softly. The next moment, the surrounding energy shields gradually disappeared, and the 6 layers of energy shields converged one after another. Then, a few robots could be seen carrying a huge glowing light ball, like a round light bulb with a diameter of 4 to 5 meters. The light ball was sent to the metal platform, and the robots retreated to the side. Then, they saw that the glowing metal ball extended a golden cable-like wire. The top of the wire was tapered, and it instantly pierced into Dean's forehead, piercing very deeply. Blood seeped out from the wound, but Dean, whose eyes were dull, still had no reaction. He seemed to have even lost the instinct to feel pain. Chapter 1139. When the body of the god of science and technology was completely illusory, Dean, who was connected by the golden optical cable, suddenly trembled slightly. His dull eyes gradually had a trace of consciousness. He blinked and looked at the novel vision. He could clearly see the tiny dust particles floating in the air dozens of meters away. This was the pupil power of an extraordinary body. What a strong body! A smile appeared on his face, but it seemed slightly uncoordinated and a bit strange. After muttering to himself, he closed his eyes again, letting the data and consciousness that poured in from between his eyebrows quickly fill the empty brain. More and more data and consciousness came in, and soon, the empty brain suddenly changed. From the emptiness, a large amount of mixed information suddenly multiplied, turned into a data stream, and collided with his consciousness. Humph! His consciousness snorted. Relying on the transmission optical cable connection, his consciousness was still connected to the entire brain, and immediately mobilized a set of antivirus decoding that had been arranged long ago into the brain of this body. Soon, the rapidly multiplying and swallowing mixed information melted like ice and snow. Soon, this group of viruses that completely destroyed and swallowed Dean's consciousness and memory were completely erased, not even a mark left. Even as the god of science and technology, he could not restore it. After dealing with this virus, he quickly began his own plundering work. His consciousness poured into all the memory cells in Dean's brain, completely occupying his brain. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes, slowly stood up from the ground, lifted his hands and feet, and simply moved. This real and clear touch made him feel a kind of long-lost emotion. Even if he had been as calm as a machine, at this moment, he could not help but laugh. In the next moment 2 beams of cold electricity shot out from his eyes. His pitch-black pupils suddenly turned golden and shrank. Then, he saw that the world in front of him was completely different. He could see the fine dust and water in the air. He could even see through a robot in front of him and see the internal structure and core energy board of the machine. This powerful ocular power made him feel novel and even more delighted. It is indeed a god's body. Not only is it a god's fetus, but the genes have accidentally mixed with the flaming worm, the ice worm, and the origami factor. It is almost perfect. Unfortunately, there is a problem when the origami factor was implanted into the body. It is not coordinated enough, and actually separated from the genes, condensed into a ball, and gave birth to a new life. Once it breaks out of the heart, it will swallow the main body, and become an unprecedented variant of origami. He looked down at his own body, and there was some surprise and excitement in his eyes. Yes, excitement. If Jaislady was here and knew that Dean was the god of science and technology at this moment, he would be shocked to see such an excited look on Dean's face. One should know that even during the most tragic war between the Federation and the Empire hundreds of years ago, when half of the Federation was injured, he did not have the slightest bit of emotion, not even a trace of regret and sorrow. Soon, the god of science and technology also realized that his emotions were fluctuating a bit, but he quickly understood. More than 200 years of immersion in the virtual world, incarnated as data and shuttled between various machines. My mind has become stiff and mechanical. Now that I have plundered a new body, I feel like I have come back to life and become a human, no, a god. His eyes were shining brightly. Although this body is not coordinated enough when the origami factor is implanted, but I can correct it. Previously, from his genes, I can see that his body is not only a god's fetus, but a little special. I did not expect that he has already embarked on the path that I want to take. Originally, he planned to plunder a god's fetus body like Dean's, and then use the flaming insect, the ice insect, and the origami to transform his body into a perfect god's body, and evolve into a real god. But he did not expect that Dean's body was already a god's body, but because the surgery to implant origami was not perfect enough, there was a small mistake, which caused the god's body to be broken. When the extraterrestrial magic insects attacked the Earth, it was because they saw the special characteristics of the human body on Earth, which coincided with the flaws of the extraterrestrial magic insects, and could help them achieve immortality. The god's fetus is a person who can play the human characteristics to the extreme, and is also the most suitable target for the magic insects. However, for more than 200 years, I used the AI to calculate countless experimental methods, plus the information obtained from the magic insects and origami, and finally calculated the most perfect synthesis route. Not only does it have the unlimited regeneration ability of the magic insects, but it also has the ability to devour all matter like the origami. If it reaches the extreme, even the air can be devoured as nutrients, and once formed, it cannot be killed. Even the fire of the sun, absolute zero, cannot destroy me. Even in the vacuum of the universe, I will not die. I am not afraid of the low temperature in the vacuum, I am not afraid of the radiation in the universe, and I am not afraid of the lack of food. Next, all I need to do is to fix this hidden danger in my body. Thinking of this, the god of science and technology lowered his head, his golden pupils penetrated everything, and saw a pure golden heart on the chest of the body, and the outline of the monster baby in the heart. He slightly squinted his eyes, a trace of coldness and murderous intent flashed through his eyes. Once the origami in the heart hatched, he could not predict what kind of monster it would be, but without a doubt, the latter would have unimaginable potential, plus the terrifying devouring ability and growth that the origami was born with. Maybe in a short period of time, it could bring the whole world into a crisis. The high and mighty emperor in the empire, and the two dragon kings in the fire dragon empire were probably still thinking about the fight between them, but they did not know that inside this small abyss body, there was something more terrifying than nuclear weapons. However, fortunately, he had successfully seized this body, and he felt that he had inadvertently saved the entire human race once, and there was a trace of a mocking smile on the corner of his mouth, but soon his eyes became calm. From now on, he was the master of this body, and naturally, he had to remove this hidden danger. However, in order to remove this heart, I have to find something else to replace it. The god of science and technology's thoughts were very fast, and he could calculate millions of possibilities in a second. There was still a golden optical cable connected to the forehead of Dean's body, and part of his consciousness was still in the brain, so he could use all the computers in the entire Federation to help him calculate, so he quickly thought of the difficulty of removing this hidden danger. This body is, after all, an incomplete divine body. If I rashly remove the heart, it will not take long for me to die. If I replace it with the heart of another person with a strong physique, this heart is just an evolution of ordinary human flesh and blood, although it is strong, but under the terrifying genes in this body, it will either be melted or crushed. There are only 3 options. Chapter 1140. He came from the Empire, and his heart should have been lost there. I can find it from his memory, but his memory was torn apart by the virus, and the virus was erased by me. If I want to restore the virus, I will need to use the power of the mainframe to calculate, which will take some time. Even if I can find his memory and know where his heart was lost, based on his situation, there is a 90% chance that his heart no longer exists in this world. The god of science and technology mumbled to himself and sighed in his heart. He could only put this option aside. The first thing I need to do now is to remove his heart and temporarily replace it with a mechanical heart. Although it will become the weakness of this body, given time, I will be able to find a way to perfectly integrate the origami factor into his body again and form a new heart. At that moment, I will become a perfect life form. Not only will I have extraordinary power, but my consciousness will also be connected to the virtual world. When I create the dream entry system, I will be able to build a dream world and let everyone live in the dream world. Be it on Earth or in the dream world, I will be the only God. Thinking of this, his eyes shone with golden light and his blood was boiling. After a few breaths, he gradually suppressed the excitement in his heart. The loneliness of being trapped in the virtual world for more than 200 years was released after he obtained this young man's body. At this moment, he had regained his calmness. His eyes were like lightning and extremely cold. He was just about to use his consciousness to connect to the virtual world, to control a robot to call Lancelot and the others to come in and listen to his orders. Suddenly, he felt that there was something strange in his head. It was as if there was a tumor stuffed in his head, and he felt a little dizzy. What's going on? He was shocked. Could there be hidden dangers in this body? With a thought, a robot quickly flew over. Its shiny alloy body stood outside the energy shield, acting as a mirror. He looked at the reflective alloy body of the robot and saw his own reflection on it. His face was filled with surprise. He immediately used his X-ray vision to look at his own brain. However, as soon as his pupil saw through the body of the robot, he saw its internal structure. He did not use the reflective body of the robot to see his own brain and body structure. I can't use X-ray vision to look at myself in a mirror. The god of science and technology was stunned for a moment. He immediately used his consciousness to mobilize all the machines on this floor. He could control any machine that was connected to the internet. In the virtual world, rather than saying he was a god, it was better to say he was the strongest virus. Body check, scan. The god of science and technology ordered through his consciousness. Several instruments that detected Dean's body data were immediately mobilized. They automatically turned on, flashing green indicator lights. Dean's body data was scanned into the instruments and analyzed quickly. Soon, the god of science and technology saw his own body structure scanned by the instrument. In the image deep inside his brain, near the back of his head, there was a thumb-sized stone ball. This is... The god of science and technology's eyes widened in shock. However, in the next moment, he felt a sharp pain in his head. The intense pain seemed to be tearing his brain cells apart. The god of science and technology, who had not experienced pain for more than 200 years and had not even felt the sensation of touch, was instantly stimulated by the intense pain. Even the part of his consciousness in the virtual world was trembling, causing chaos. At this moment, with Dujo City as the core, many computer systems in the nearby large cities were showing strange, garbled code. This was a large-scale computer virus situation. Many people were at a loss, thinking that the machines were broken. Some even cursed angrily. The god of science and technology naturally did not pay attention to these things. At this moment, he did not have the mood or consciousness to pay attention to these things. His mind was filled with pain, and after the intense pain lasted for a few seconds, a turbulent and chaotic consciousness suddenly rushed into his brain. This consciousness was made up of many memory fragments and pieces, and they quickly engulfed his consciousness in a sweeping manner. Roar. The god of science and technology heard a crazy roar. It was like the roar of a beast, like that of a demon. Get out! It was followed by a monstrous roar. It was deafening, like thunder from thousands of miles away. The god of science and technology's consciousness was shaken to the point where he could barely concentrate. This feeling was like trying to solve a complex math problem seriously, but there was a deafening noise next to him. He could not concentrate at all and had a splitting headache. Who are you? Are you the god of science and technology? The youth's body trembled, and his face was full of horror. His eyes protruded, and he held his head with both hands. Then he shouted, "No, I am the god of science and technology. No, my original name is Lin Chongsheng. No, it's all wrong. I am Crimson Moon. No, that's a bitch. I am the demon king of the Dark Church." He looked up to the sky and screamed. His face was filled with pain, and his expression was terrifying. Sharp blades gradually protruded from his body. He looked like a monster. The sharp blades dispersed like black magic energy. Then, a blazing flame ignited on his hair. However, the flame did not burn his hair. This was because the sun beast controlled heat. It allowed his body to absorb the heat energy from the flame. It was like a plastic bag filled with water that could not be burned by fire. He screamed and suddenly bounced up. He hit the energy shield above his head and fell to the ground. Like a beast, he used his head to hit the floor. I am Lin Chongsheng. I am the god of science and technology. I have lived for more than 200 years. Disappear from me, you lowly mortal! The youth suddenly roared. His eyes emitted a monstrous cold light as if he wanted to kill the common people. But the next moment, he grabbed his hair and roared, "No, I am Dean. Lin Chongsheng is just a dream. That's why I created the dream system." He suddenly roared. His body curled up on the ground. He held his head and roared. His mouth roared indistinctly, and his voice was incomparably painful. After about 10 minutes, his body gradually stopped trembling and slowly came to a rest, as if he had experienced an intense hand-to-hand combat. He felt his entire body was drenched in sweat, but when he sat up, he could not help but laugh out loud. I won! He clenched his fists tightly. The smile on his face disappeared, and it was filled with hatred and anger. You are smart and cautious, but in the end, you still made a wrong move. He slightly sneered, but his eyes were filled with killing intent. It's over. Even if you held back, so what? In terms of memory and willpower, I will not lose to anyone. Chapter 1141. This battle of consciousness had made the god of science and technology extremely tired. He sat down and rested for a while before he felt a little better. Now, this body is mine. Once I cure this body, who in this world can stop me, Lin Chongsheng? The god of science and technology's eyes lit up as he sneered. His consciousness connected to the part of consciousness in the virtual world through the golden optical cable on his forehead. He ordered, "Prepare a laboratory for me immediately and 2 origami corpses. I want to conduct an experiment." His order was transmitted through his mind, but the next moment, the part of consciousness in the virtual world responded with a cold voice. "You're still here." The god of science and technology raised his eyebrows, but his heart sank. "What do you mean I'm still here? I am you and you are me. If I'm not here, why would you exist? You've infected this part of my consciousness. Mortal, I've underestimated your capabilities," the consciousness of the virtual world said coldly. Its voice was filled with murderous intent, but it was also extremely rational. When the god of science and technology heard the virtual consciousness speaking to him in such a tone, he could not help but be furious. Then, he thought of something and asked in surprise, "What's going on? Could it be that I've been infected by a virus? No, no virus can hurt me. Wait, could it be that during the battle of consciousness, he had followed the data and transferred it into the virtual world?" When he thought of this, his expression changed slightly, and he said coldly, "Don't think that I can't do anything to you just because you've been infected by the virtual consciousness. Fool!" The virtual consciousness scolded coldly. "Until now, you still don't know that you've been infected? The consciousness of this lowly mortal has mixed into your thoughts and hypnotized you." "Hypnotized me? How is that possible? I'm Lin Chongqing." The god of science and technology could not help but sneer. "Then do you remember whose body you've taken?" the virtual consciousness said coldly. "Of course it's..." The god of science and technology was about to say that name without thinking, but when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he felt that it was not right. He could not help but lower his head, and his face was filled with doubt. "Strange, whose body did I take? This body was originally mine. Someone invaded my body and I expelled it." "Lowly mortal, do you think you can fight back like this?" "Your body is mine," the virtual consciousness said in a cold voice. Hearing his words, the god of science and technology was instantly awakened, and his eyes were filled with anger. "I know, you're the one who tried to steal my body. You're not my consciousness, so who exactly are you?" "Humph!" the virtual consciousness snorted coldly. "Since you've assimilated this part of my consciousness, then perish together with it." After saying that, a surge of chaotic data suddenly rushed out from the golden optical cable, quickly occupying the consciousness of the god of technology. The chaotic data was like a virus soldier, quickly devouring his memories. However, he was the god of technology after all, and he could instantly see through this chaotic data. He knew that it was a kind of data virus, and he knew that if he continued to stay in this brain, his consciousness would gradually be eaten away. He didn't hold back anymore. His consciousness flowed into the virtual world through the transmission cable. "This is my home field. You're dead," the god of science and technology said coldly to the virtual consciousness. In the vast starry sky of the virtual world, the galaxy of the universe revolved around 2 giants. The god of science and technology was one of the giants. He looked at the illusory figure in front of him and was ready to attack. "Fool!" The illusory figure quickly solidified. It was an extremely handsome Eastern face. He said coldly, "Look at your face now." After saying that, he waved his hand, and the surrounding galaxy gathered countless planets. The dense starlight turned into a mirror, and the face of the god of science and technology was reflected on it. The god of science and technology saw this face, a very delicate face. "Look at your body now." The illusory figure waved his hand again, and the god of science and technology's vision penetrated the surrounding virtual universe of the starry sky. He saw the figure of a young man standing in the energy field, and his face was the same as his. "That's right, I look like this." The god of science and technology breathed a sigh of relief, and then looked at the illusory figure with a cold gaze. If my face was the same as yours, it would be a little more interesting. Humph, you want to devour me? I'll let you know who's the ruler of this virtual world. He also raised his hand, and countless meteorites surged over from the surrounding starry universe, colliding with the illusory figure and creating many ripples. The illusory figure's expression was cold, and the killing intent in his eyes suddenly disappeared. He was emotionless as he said indifferently, "No matter how I calculated, I didn't expect that you would retain your own consciousness, and I didn't expect that the consciousness you retained would be able to infect my consciousness, or even hypnotize mine. In that case, you already knew that I would invade your brain and take over your body? You knew from the moment you came here?" The god of science and technology was slightly stunned, suddenly feeling that he seemed to have made a mistake somewhere. "I've underestimated you, but you've also underestimated me." The illusory figure's eyes suddenly burst with cold light. "To me, this part of my consciousness can be created again at any time. You've hypnotized and infected him, wanting to use my own consciousness to deal with myself. But you don't know that before invading your brain, the reason why this part of my consciousness was left in the virtual world was to deal with such a contingency." The god of science and technology was stunned, somewhat at a loss as a thought flashed through his mind. Could it be that I've really made a mistake? The next moment, the illusory figure raised his hand and slowly said, "Second consciousness, unlock." Boom! The vast virtual universe suddenly exploded, and an unimaginably huge figure forcefully squeezed in from the universe, landing on top of the two of them. This giant's body was twice the size of the god of science and technology and the illusory figure, and he looked exactly the same as the illusory figure. However, the indifference in his eyes was even stronger, and the disdain in his eyes was as if the whole world was like dust that could be destroyed with a flick of a finger. I didn't expect that the day would really come when I can use my second consciousness. This huge figure's expression was indifferent as he looked down on the god of science and technology. Fortunately, I've kept the archive and copied my consciousness. Now wake up and see who you really are. His forehead split open, and a divine glow enveloped the god of science and technology. Within the glow were countless memories being transmitted. When the god of science and technology saw the divine glow enveloping him, he could not help but feel a little frightened. Was his memory really wrong? If it was true, then so be it, as it proved that these two in front of him were also himself. But what if it was not a mistake? If his consciousness was awake and correct, then wouldn't he be bewitched if he allowed the other party's memories to be transmitted to him? This kind of hesitation only lasted for a few seconds. After all, he was the god of science and technology who had lived for more than 200 years. He was decisive and arrogant. His figure quickly dodged the memory glow, and with his familiarity and control of the virtual world, he immediately wrote countless viruses and attacked these two virtual consciousnesses who claimed to be him. Humph! The second consciousness figure snorted coldly and also raised his hand to grab, mobilizing the countless viruses he had written. Like a colorful storm or like countless meteorites crashing into each other, they surrounded the god of science and technology. And the illusory figure also wrote countless viruses to attack the god of science and technology. Seeing that the two of them could also use such powerful attacks, the god of science and technology was shocked and cold. He tried to seize the authority of the mainframe and seal these two consciousnesses in the virtual world. However, when his consciousness entered the mainframe, he found that the mainframe had already set a fixed rule. It could not seal him and these two consciousnesses, and he did not have the right to change this authority. Damn it, if this goes on, only the mainframe will be exhausted. The god of science and technology gritted his teeth. The three of them were using viruses to attack each other here, trying to use viruses to decompose each other. Moreover, the mainframe's calculations were used to write the viruses, so these virus attacks were like dust to them. They could not hurt each other at all, and if this went on, it would only damage the mainframe's lifespan. If this goes on, the attacks will exceed the mainframe's calculation limit. Once the mainframe is paralyzed, most of the Federation's equipment will be damaged. The god of science and technology gritted his teeth. Suddenly, he thought of a way. He quickly wrote a large cluster of viruses, and then secretly wrote a code in these viruses and transmitted it to his body, destroying the viruses in his body's brain. Chapter 1142. He retreated into that human's body. The virtual figure looked at the god of science and technology who had turned into a stream of data and disappeared. His eyes were cold, and there was a hint of anger in them. He was proud and had calculated everything, but he was defeated by an ant-like human. It was unbearable. What the hell is going on? The second consciousness looked at the virtual figure and frowned slightly. He had just unlocked the memory chip, and his memory was still at the moment when he was saved. Although he saw the strange situation after coming out, he used the computing power of the Cortex Prime to think of thousands of possibilities and guesses in a second, and even had some guesses about the real situation, but he still had to confirm it. The gaze of the virtual figure no longer lingered on the place where the god of science and technology had disappeared. It looked up at him and said, "I split a part of my consciousness to enter his body, but an accident happened. From the last image that the part of my consciousness sent back before it became chaotic, this mortal already knew why I had captured him. He had long since prepared a trap and a counterattack. I know, but the problem is, even if he was prepared, what could he do?" The huge figure frowned, and his eyes were filled with disdain and pride. He had the ability to be proud. Among the god fetuses, he was the only one who had escaped the control of the demon insects. Even the demon insects that had invaded the earth did not know of his existence, so he could hide in the virtual world and wait for an opportunity to counterattack. Once he seized Dean's body, it meant that he had enough power to launch a counterattack, and even defeat the demon insects, and become the master of this world. Success was right in front of him, but there was an accident. However, the accident was not caused by his overconfidence and conceit. In fact, although he was arrogant, he would never underestimate his enemy. He was even more cautious. From entering Dean's body, it could be seen that although he felt 100% sure, he still chose to leave a part of his consciousness in the virtual world, just in case. Moreover, before that, he deliberately gave Dean a period of free time to observe this carrier through various Federation instruments. The latter's communicator, as well as every small device in the room, were his eyes. It could be said that Dean had never left his sight since he entered the Federation. The identity that the guy disguised, the secrets that he was hiding, and all his privacy were naked in his eyes. However, through the secret environment that the guy thought that he was alone, he was able to observe the guy's personality, thoughts, and the purpose of his visit to the Federation. After all, a person was the most relaxed when he was alone. A hint of gloom flashed in the virtual silhouette's eyes. This mortal seems to be very experienced in such matters. Before I entered his brain, he hardened a part of his brain cells, making it impossible for the virus I sent in to destroy them. Then, when my consciousness entered his brain, it seemed to have triggered the condition for him to regain his consciousness. The moment he regained his consciousness, he launched a counterattack against me. Moreover, he is very smart. He did not fight my consciousness to death, nor did he try to digest my consciousness. Instead, he integrated into my consciousness like a parasite of my own. So when my consciousness came to the virtual world, I felt that something was wrong. There was something else mixed in it. If I hadn't noticed that something was wrong and cut off the integration in time, this part of my consciousness would have been parasitized by him. Perhaps at that time, I wouldn't be able to distinguish between me and him. The huge figure was slightly startled. Although the virtual figure's words were a bit roundabout, he still understood it. In a second, he figured out the doorway, as well as the wisdom and reaction of the mortal whom he regarded as a carrier. He could not help but show a trace of seriousness in his eyes. If it was him, he estimated that he could not do better than the latter. To be able to escape from his hands, this method was just like how he escaped from the demonic worm's operating table. Cunning, intelligent, and fast reaction. He felt that he had met his own kind, and this was a person not inferior to him. However, he was not the him from more than 200 years ago. In the more than 200 years of integration into the virtual world, how many things had he seen? In his brain, it could be said that all the wisdom of the entire Federation was gathered. Using his own petrifying magic mark ability, he divided his own memory cells into two, replicating them in his own brain and petrifying the replicated one. No matter how strong a virus is, it will not be able to attack something that has been petrified. This is just like a hacker. No matter how powerful he is, he will not be able to attack a computer that is not connected to the internet. The huge figure narrowed his eyes slightly and then chuckled softly, a dangerous light flashing in his eyes. Since he thought of using this method to fight back, I guess it is not just a parasite in that part of my consciousness. If I did not save a second consciousness, he should be trying in vain to use his parasitic consciousness to integrate with this part of my virtual consciousness. When the integration is completed, his parasitic consciousness in my consciousness will revive and devour my consciousness. This is his plan. Interesting guy. I didn't expect there to be such a person in this world. Unfortunately, if he had not become an obstacle to me, when I become a god in the future, he would have followed me under my command. He would also be a terrifying character. The virtual figure asked, "Then what do we do now? Although that part of my consciousness has been infected, it is still me. I still have the authority of the host, and can enter the virtual world through other ports at any time. Even if we mobilize the robot army to encircle and suppress him, it will be useless. He can also control the robot army. Our carriers in the real world are all machines and are useless." The huge figure shook his head slightly, interrupted him, and said indifferently, "I will solve this. Since I have awakened, there is no need for your remnant consciousness to exist. Return to my memory." After saying that, he raised his big hand to grab him. The virtual figure was stunned, and a trace of struggle flashed in his eyes. He said, "No, I can exist. I am also me. You want to be independent with an incomplete consciousness? Fortunately, I have long been prepared for this. Whoever has a complete consciousness is the real me. If it was not for the fact that I felt that part of the consciousness was abnormal, I would have also devoured it." The huge figure's eyes were indifferent, and his hand did not stop at all. In an instant, he grabbed the virtual figure and exerted force. The latter's face was full of indignation and anger, but in the end, he still turned into countless streams of light and disappeared in his palm. After slowly absorbing these streams of light, the huge figure had a better understanding of what had happened. His gaze followed the port and saw that the god of technology, who had retreated into the human body, had already pulled out the transmission cable on his forehead and was preparing to leave the energy shield. "Next, you should take the initiative to find me." A trace of interest and coldness flashed in the huge figure's eyes. Chapter 1143. I'm finally out. After returning to his body, the god of science and technology heaved a long sigh of relief, as if he had fought 100 battles. After unplugging the transmission cable, he checked his memories and confirmed that nothing had mixed in. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief, knowing that he had shaken off the two infected consciousnesses in the virtual world. Based on his understanding of his past abilities, although these two virtual consciousnesses were lawless in the virtual world, they could not even control a blade of grass in the real world. Next, they will probably control the robot army to ambush me and prevent me from leaving. However, I can also control this robot army. In the case of conflicting program commands, the robot army will be completely paralyzed, but if they want to kill me, they can sacrifice the robot army and activate the irreversible self-destruction command. The god of science and technology frowned. He had control over his body and could move around in the real world, but this had also become his fatal weakness. In the past, he had turned into data and roamed the virtual world, able to appear in any computer. However, the current him only had one body, and that was this young man's body. Once this body was strangled and turned into dust, he would also die and disappear completely. If they want to destroy my virtual consciousnesses, it's meaningless to fight them in the virtual world alone. It will only damage the mainframe. However, I can find the machinery hive mind and the mainframe, restart the mainframe, and return all data and programs to zero. This way, I can completely wipe them out, but they won't give me this chance. If they detect my route, no, I don't care about the life and death of these lowly citizens of the Federation at all. They might have already, thinking of this. The god of science and technology's pupils contracted, and his face was filled with horror. He realized a terrifying possibility. The latter might have already activated nuclear missiles, locked onto the entire Dujan city, and used the power of nuclear weapons to bury the entire city's citizens along with him. This idea was a little crazy, but it was not impossible. Only he himself understood himself the best. The god of science and technology knew very well how cold and cruel his heart was. If there was an existence that threatened him, he would not hesitate even if he had to destroy more than half of the Federation. As for these Federation citizens, with the reproduction ability of humans, they would be born in a few decades. If he adjusted the gap between the rich and the poor, a little poverty alleviation would be enough to increase the population by several times. These thoughts flashed through his mind in less than half a minute. When he came to his senses, he realized that he had wasted precious half a minute of time. At the same time, he sighed at his thinking speed. If it was before, with the help of the mainframe, even if there were thousands of times more thoughts, it would still turn in a second. This also made him realize that his current computing ability could no longer be compared to the two consciousnesses in the virtual world. I have to leave the Federation. He made a decision in his heart and immediately mobilized several robots around him to shut down the energy shield and rush out of the energy shield. At the same time, he opened the door to the basement. Jacelity was standing outside the door. He was surprised when he saw the door open. His face changed as he saw Dean coming out of the door. He was surprised. "Clear a path for me. I want to go out for a while, now," the god of science and technology said coldly. When Jacelity heard Dean's indifferent tone, he knew that the plan of the god of science and technology had been successfully completed. He couldn't help but feel a bit of regret in his heart. However, he hid it well and didn't reveal any of it. He also didn't suspect that Dean was deliberately pretending. After all, apart from him, only the invincible god of science and technology in the virtual world could use the door and the energy shield at will. At the same time, the latter secretly closed the energy barrier, opened the door, and walked out. He felt that the other party was hinting to him. Not only did he come to the real world and possess the body of a powerful demon, he also retained the ability to move freely in the virtual world. Virtual and reality both were the strongest. "Yes, sir." He bowed his head respectfully and quickly passed down the order through his communicator. At this moment, the entire Dujan city revolved around the Terrace Consortium. A railway that carried countless passengers on weekdays had stopped and was emptied of passengers just to wait for Dean's arrival. The airport was completely shut down and gave up the route, waiting for only one person to come and set sail. For a time, the citizens of Dujan City were filled with complaints. Many experts came out to attack the privileges and capitalism. Many internet mobs came out to clamor for everyone to be equal. Similarly, some social elites filed a lawsuit against terrorist Shenzhou Airlines because of the delay of the flight. There were also celebrities who posted a statement of doubt on their personal webpage because of the delay of the flight, attracting countless attention. The shocking actions of the terrorist consortium attracted the attention of the entire federation. Even the government had to come out and broadcast the matter. However, they didn't attack the terrorist consortium. Instead, they sent reporters to interview and find out the reason. In the end, they found out that there were some unavoidable reasons that led to the delay of the flight. While the outside world was in an uproar, the terrorist consortium was very calm. Many directors sent inquiries, but they were suppressed by Jaislady. When it was mentioned that it was the decision of the Lord God, many directors immediately calmed down and expressed that they were willing to serve and send their regards to the Lord God. Accompanied by Jaislady and the others, the god of science and technology came to the waiting fighter jet outside the base. Jaislady wanted to accompany him, but the god of science and technology refused. He could only watch as the god of science and technology boarded the fighter jet. They probably wouldn't dare to activate the nuclear weapons. After boarding the fighter jet, the god of science and technology gradually calmed down. He realized that ever since he had entered this human body, his emotions were easily affected. He couldn't be as cold as he used to be, and he wouldn't change his expression even if a mountain collapsed before him. They should know the condition of my body. Even if the nuclear weapons were to be launched, I would be able to sense them in advance and avoid the core of the nuclear explosion, the god of science and technology thought to himself. The god of science and technology thought to himself. He had long since mastered this body and knew it like the back of his hand. It was as if this body had always been his body. There was no sense of unfamiliarity, and he naturally knew the abilities and strengths of this body. The most terrifying thing about nuclear weapons was the high-temperature radiation in the core of the explosion. However, this body had a magic mark called the Sun Beast, and its ability was to control heat. As long as he wasn't surrounded by the tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of degrees Celsius in the core of the explosion, he could control the heat quickly and reduce it to a level that his body could withstand. As for the nuclear radiation, he could also resist it by petrifying his body. Chapter 1144. I'll leave the Federation for now and return after I've perfected this body. It's never too late for revenge. The god of science and technology thought about his next plan. He had intended to reboot the mainframe, but considering that the other party would use suicidal attacks to harm him, it was a little risky, so he gave up on the idea. It wouldn't be too late for revenge after he had repaired the damaged parts of this divine body. However, without the technological guidance of the Federation, he could only sneak into the Empire or the Fire Dragon Nation to find a solution. It would be another long and dangerous journey. Thinking about this, he sighed slightly and rubbed his brows, a little depressed. Half an hour later, the god of science and technology arrived at the wilderness outside of Dujo City through a secret passage. There weren't many people accompanying him or sending him off. He entered the vast wilderness alone, and a breeze accompanied by the smell of grass blew over. It made him feel alive. This is great. The god of science and technology took a deep breath, feeling that the worries in his heart had dissipated. He immediately activated his splitter wings and flew into the depths of the wilderness, speeding away from the peace circle. He knew that this wasteland within the Federation's peace circle seemed peaceful. Occasionally there would be lone monsters and zombies. However, in reality, everything here was under the Federation's sight. In the depths of the wild grass, the unknown mechanical bugs might be the eyes that were spying on all of this. No pursuers? As he left the peace circle, the god of science and technology noticed that there were no pursuers behind him. He was a little surprised, but then he understood that if the other party wanted to send someone to kill him, the price would be too high. The only way was for all the Terrace Financial Group's creation god mechas to self-destruct. Even so, it was unknown whether or not they could kill him. After all, he existed in this young man's body, and he was also the owner of the mecha. After heaving a sigh of relief, the god of science and technology went deep into the area of demons outside the peace circle. Here, he could vaguely see the remains of human mechas buried in the soil. The mechas were all made of special alloys. Even after being soaked in the rain and soil, there were no signs of rust, but their colors were no longer as bright. Soon, the god of science and technology encountered the demons that were scuttling out of the forest, courting death. The god of science and technology's eyes flashed with cold electricity. He raised his hand and a sharp blade extended out like a whip, cutting off the head of the giant serpent monster. Blood splattered all over the ground. The feeling of battle gave him an inexplicable sense of exhilaration. Perhaps it was because he had stayed in the virtual world for too long that he had finally regained his human senses and sense of smell. This made him feel a sense of excitement from the bottom of his heart. The smell of fresh blood attracted other wandering demons. As soon as they appeared, they were targeted by the god of science and technology, who rushed over and killed them instantly. Stepping on the corpses of the monsters, the god of science and technology ventured deeper into the forest. Aside from encountering monsters along the way, he also encountered a team of mechs sent by the Federation to explore the monsters' territory. There were 6 of them in total. One of them was the Titan mech with extremely strong defense, comparable to a level 8 mech. The other was the Spider Queen mech that excelled in perception, able to release a large number of small robotic spiders that covered the surrounding area. There was also the Flame of the Goddess mech that specialized in long-range attack. It controlled a few cannons and dealt wild damage. There was also the Close Combat mech Ghost Swordsman. It was graceful and agile, able to change directions in the air with the help of magnetic fields. It had great combat ability, but it was also extremely difficult to operate. With just a glance, the god of science and technology recognized the models and combat abilities of these mechs. He even knew their strengths and weaknesses. After all, these were genuine mechs produced by the Terrace Financial Group. Those master mech designers had already recorded the blueprints into the mainframe, which was equivalent to recording them into his brain. Those who see me shall die. The god of science and technology did not hold back. He turned into a demon-slashing body, like an Azura that had crawled out of hell. Waving his sharp blades, he pounced at the few mechs. Without any suspense, the battle was completely one-sided. These indestructible mechs were easily sliced apart like tofu in front of the demon-slashing body. The pilots in the mechs were all indescribably shocked. Their eyes widened, and they could only cry out the word demon before they died. After torturing and killing this team of exploratory mech soldiers, the god of science and technology continued to venture deeper. The demons he encountered were getting stronger and stronger, but he had no intention of retreating. Instead, in the continuous battles, he felt more and more at ease. It was as if he had been fighting like this for many years and had incomparably deep experience. And as the battles went on, that long-lost sense of familiarity gradually returned, making him obsessed. He felt that his control over his body was becoming more and more flexible. In the middle of the night, beside a lake in the forest, the god of science and technology leaned against the carcass of a 7 to 8 meters giant hairy elephant, looking at the bright moon in the distance reflected on the surface of the lake in front of him. The ripples were sparkling, quiet, and beautiful. In the depths of the forest, the faint howls of wolves and the cries of insects could be heard. A quiet night like this, without the hustle and bustle of the cities in the Federation, not only did he not feel uncomfortable, but he also felt nostalgic. It was very beautiful. Just like that, he rested quietly, sat quietly, and thought quietly. He squinted his eyes, enjoying the peace at this moment. His gaze also unknowingly became extremely gentle. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly, he had a feeling in his heart. He wanted to pour out his heart, but just as he turned around and was about to speak, he suddenly froze. Beside him, there was only darkness and no one. Have you ever been this lonely? Do you also feel that someone is missing? Who is missing? The god of science and technology was slightly startled. He looked to his side, where the carcass of the hairy elephant extended. It was a pitch-black forest, but beside his body, there seemed to be someone existing. Who is it? He gradually frowned, feeling that there seemed to be some things in his mind that seemed to be broken, and he couldn't recall them no matter how hard he tried. However, he was not an impatient person, so he didn't feel annoyed. Instead, he closed his eyes and slowly sorted out his thoughts and memories. Countless scenes flashed through his mind like fleeting lights and passing shadows. The first scene was also the scene when he was born. Unlike other children, the first scene he saw when he opened his eyes was a layer of transparent glass. Outside the glass was the world, the warm smiles of his parents. He grew up day by day, but the transparent glass in front of him was always there. It seemed to be preventing him from integrating into this world. Until one day the glass disappeared. He saw the end of the world, saw the invasion of demonic insects, and also saw his parents turn into demonic insects. They locked him in a freezer, sealed him in the darkness, and sealed him in eternal sleep. However, he was unwilling to give up. He escaped and entered a vast and boundless virtual world through a port. He wandered in the virtual world and saw all kinds of changes in the outside world, the life and death of countless people, the joy, anger, sorrow, and joy of countless people. The more he saw, the more he gradually found the core law. This core law determined the joy and anger of countless people, misery and joy. The principle of the weak suffering, the law of the strong dying, everything was arranged by the law of nature. Dutiful children served evil parents who repeatedly exploited their children. Evil children had kind parents who repeatedly asked for help, love, and sincerity, but were betrayed. Half-hearted, but were treated with countless sincerity. A handsome face was worth countless true feelings, but an ugly face was worth countless indifference. Birth, old age, sickness, and death were pitiful and fortunate. Why were some people sad, and why were some people crazy? Was misery really misery? Was joy really joy? Fate, but it also had a core law. After more than 200 years of overlooking and observing, he had gradually understood it, so he became indifferent and numb. Numb was not just because he had seen too much, but because he had seen too much and understood it, so he became numb. As he sorted out these memories, the god of science and technology's mood also gradually became cold, and his emotions as a human were also slowly decreasing. However, there seemed to be a shadow in the bottom of his heart. Who exactly did I lose? He muttered to himself. The memories in his mind reversed again, circling around, and countless images flashed. Over and over again, when the number of flashes increased, he found that there were a few faces that appeared the most, and as he thought, they became clearer and clearer. When one of the beautiful faces appeared completely clearly in his mind, he suddenly froze, and then tears slowly flowed down, covering his face. How could I forget you? Chapter 11:45. The sadness at this moment made the teenager choke with sobs. There was no trace of cold-blooded decisiveness in his body. Instead, he was like an ordinary weak teenager. His fingers clenched into fists. His face was full of pain, remorse, guilt, and anger towards himself. After a moment, he slowly stopped his sadness and buried this soft thing deep in his heart. His eyes quickly changed. They became cold, decisive, and without the slightest emotion. He said in a cold voice, "You have failed. My consciousness is not extinguished. I am Dean, the king of the dark church, the emperor of the holy church. All your memories will become my memories." No. Impossible. Suddenly, his face was full of shock. He shouted angrily, "What bullshit, Dean? I am the god of science and technology. I am Lin Chongsheng. You are just a poor person who has seen the outside world from the virtual world for more than 200 years. Ant-like thing, I've read your stupid and ridiculous story long ago. Abandoned by your lover, imprisoned, and watching your lover die tragically in front of your eyes, yet unable to do anything. How can a weak trash like you be compared to me? Really?" His face suddenly changed again. He was indifferent. "You said that I am just a passerby that you have seen. Then why do you know so much about me? Why do you know about my things? Is there anything in this world that can hide from my eyes? In the Federation, I know about anyone's things." He sneered again. But as soon as he finished his words, he suddenly frowned. It seemed that something was wrong. "Do you remember? Where did those scenes you saw happen?" He sneered. The next moment, his expression abruptly changed. He clutched his head in pain, rolled on the ground, and roared like a wild beast. At the same time, in the depths of his mind, the originally chaotic memories were suddenly torn apart at this moment. A piece of memory was torn into two, transforming into two consciousnesses. The moment these two consciousnesses appeared, they collided fiercely and fought with each other. They sent out countless thoughts in an attempt to hypnotize, assimilate, and devour each other. "Damn you! You are still alive! How dare you sneak into my memory? Damn it!" One of the consciousnesses was extremely angry. He was the god of science and technology Lin Chongsheng. Now he had completely remembered everything. He had extracted Dean from his memory. He remembered who he was and those memories that belonged to him. At the same time, he also knew that because Dean had mixed into his memory, all the things he had done before seemed so ridiculous, and he almost fought with himself. "This is my body, my battlefield. Previously, I was unable to devour all of your memories, only a portion. Then, I took the opportunity to merge my memories into yours, making you think that you had devoured me. Now, without the consciousness of the virtual world to back you up, without the mainframe to help you calculate, you are nothing." Feng Luo's eyes flashed with a cold glint in his eyes as he stared at Feng Luo. The other consciousness said coldly, "It was Dean." His voice was full of killing intent and confidence. But only he knew that the purpose of showing such confidence was to attack the opponent's momentum in the upcoming battle. Now the two consciousnesses were in conflict in his mind. Although the god of science and technology did not have the help of the virtual mainframe to calculate and lost the half of his consciousness left in the virtual world, he still could not be underestimated. And this time, if he lost, he would be digested until there was nothing left. It was like the first personality and the second personality in the body were fighting. When the result was out, it meant that the body was cured. There would be no second personality, only one consciousness. Damn you! The god of science and technology was furious. He never thought that he would be forced to this point by an ant-like prey. When he removed Dean from his memory, he understood everything. He also knew the reasons why he fell into this situation. From the beginning, when Dean came to the Federation, the data of the physical examination was transmitted to the virtual world. He knew from the mainframe. In the virtual world, the mainframe was equivalent to his brain. Otherwise, he would not pay attention to the physical examination data of a border mecha operator. However, when he knew Dean's identity, he was ecstatic. He did not order people to capture him directly. Instead, he wanted to see what this ant wanted to do by sneaking into the Federation. Why would a divine fetus sneak into the Federation from the demon race? Didn't the Emperor know that the Federation was his territory? Dean lurked, disguised, killed, and did all kinds of things. Through these things, the god of science had a deeper understanding of Dean's character. He even guessed that Dean's purpose in coming to the Federation was to find a way to cure the walking dead. And the reason was probably to cure his relatives or lovers. Although this kind of kinship and love relationship was only a laughable consolation between humans in his eyes, he knew that these stubborn ants who could not see through the truth cared a lot about these things. If not for the blood moon, he would not have forcibly captured Dean so early. Because Dean was under his eyes and under his control from the beginning to the end, he did not care too much about Dean. He even allowed Dean to join the Randy Company. Even though he knew that doing so would expose some things, he did not care. After all, in this Federation, even if Dean knew his existence and what he was going to do, so what? Even if the Emperor of the demon race came, he would still be at his mercy. However, he didn't expect that the result would be like this. The reason was not because he was too arrogant or careless, but because he understood his own flaws. Dean had long been aware of this flaw, and this flaw had long been seen through by Dean. Dean had laid a trap for him. The flaw was that although he knew everything, he could not know everyone's thoughts at this moment. He could roughly analyze these people's thoughts through psychological analysis, but in the end, he could not penetrate into their brains. This was also the reason why he made the dream system. He wanted to completely control all life. However, for the god of science, this was just a deepening of his desire to control. In his view, it was not a flaw. For example, if a human could not fly, would he regard it as his own flaw? Of course not. But at this moment, because of this, he suffered a loss and fell. Only then did he know how fatal this flaw was. Perhaps, before he had sent the Creator's armor to capture Dean, the latter had already been aware of his intentions. Even the escape and capture of Dean may have been planned by the other party, copying out a copy of the brain's memory and petrifying it. This was not only the ultimate control of the body's cells, but also a person with extremely strong willpower could do it. It was thousands of times more difficult than copying the memory with the help of the mainframe system. You already knew that I would plunder your body, but why did you dare to mix your own memory into my memory? Let my memory be the dominant one so that you would not expose yourself and also avoid being destroyed. Instead, it would make my memory wrong and be rejected by my virtual memory. It also made me afraid of my own virtual memory, so that I would stay away from the Federation. The god of science and technology couldn't help but be angry. At the same time, he was also shocked. This was a terrible plan that was not inferior to his. The most important thing was that he couldn't figure out why the other party was so bold. It must be known that Dean had integrated his own memory into the god of science's memory and turned into a passerby character that the god of science had seen. This was likely to be completely fixed, so that the god of science and technology would always think that it was just a passerby character that he had seen in his memory. I said that my willpower is thousands of times stronger than yours. I believe in my own existence. Even if it is just a passerby character in your memory, I believe that I am the protagonist, I am the real me. Dean's voice was incomparably cold and very cruel. The god of science and technology said angrily, "Fart, you're only in your 20s, but I've lived for more than 200 years. I've seen things that people who have lived for 2,000 years, or even 20,000 years, can't see. How can you compare to me? So what if you have lived for a long time? Do adults believe in themselves more than children? No." Dean sneered. "So what if you have seen more? It is because you have seen more that your self-awareness is weak. This is precisely your weakness. Not to mention me, even the average soldier's willpower is stronger than yours. You have used the Federation's mainframe and countless smart devices to monitor the entire Federation. You have seen countless people's joys and sorrows, life and death. Can you still distinguish who is who? Who are you? Who are you? The god of science felt that Dean's words were like a sword that pierced his heart, making him angry. But soon he suddenly realized that the purpose of Dean's words was obviously to hit him. This meant that the other party didn't have the confidence to defeat him. My consciousness is weak? Ridiculous. The god of science and technology calmed down after thinking it through. He sneered. You don't understand how terrifying my willpower has been tempered for 200 years. With your consciousness of more than 20 years, do you think you can compete with me? Dean indifferently said. In my opinion, you are just a chicken and a stray dog. You have long lost your consciousness. You don't even think that you are a human. You don't have love or hate. You only have rights. You just want to rule everyone. But you don't know what you can do even if you rule everyone. You are just born to rule. The world needs something to rule everyone. You are that thing. You are not a human and you don't deserve to talk to me about willpower. I am not a human because I am a god. The god of science and technology sneered. How can you understand the will of a god? I don't know what a god is, but I know what a dog is. Dean retorted. You think that you are a god overlooking all sentient beings. You don't get angry when your subordinates die. You don't feel sad for them. You think that life and death is up to fate. You know the cause of their death, the cause and effect, and even the reason why they came to this step, including their future achievements. You are omniscient and omnipotent. But because of this, you are ignorant and fearless. Even a dog will bark a few times when its owner, who has raised it for a few years, passes away. But you won't. So you are not as good as a dog. You have no self-awareness. You have no family awareness, no social awareness, no national awareness. You don't know where your family is. You don't know what role you play in your family. You don't know if you should treat your descendants well. You don't have the awareness and self-awareness of a human being. Instead, you despise humans. But you don't know that you are also a human. You pursue the so-called God but despise your own kind. You think that God is noble and omnipotent while humans are lowly and stupid. The most ridiculous thing is that you don't have the awareness of a human being. But you perfectly inherit the human nature. It is human instinct to pursue beauty and abandon the dregs. Unfortunately, if you don't have your own force field and awareness, then what is the difference between you and a beast? The strength of human beings lies in constant self-restraint and self-cultivation. So you are neither a powerful person nor a noble god. You are just a dog living in the gap between humans and beasts. Nonsense. The god of science and technology was furious. He roared. Do you think that you can defeat my faith with just a few words? You're saying all this just to strike a blow to my willpower. But you are wrong. The more you say this, the more it proves that my willpower is stronger than yours. Once I kill you, I will return to the Federation. From today onwards, I, Lin Chongqing, will be the supreme god in this world. As for you, you are just an ant, ignorant, lowly human. Is that so? Dean's voice was ghostly and cold. Do you know why I dared to take the risk of merging into your memory? Because I know that I can eventually break away from your memory. Because my faith is strong enough. I believe in myself. Also because your memory is weak and vulnerable. My obsession is deeper than yours. I have a reason to live. I have a reason to believe in myself. Because there is a person waiting for me. She belongs to me. So I must live for her. I must live with my will. Go to hell. The god of science and technology roared. His consciousness collided with Dean's. Countless memories collided with each other. They used their faith to attack each other. In an instant, countless hypnotic words were used to attack each other. They suppressed each other's arrogance and will. In the quiet forest, the howls of pain were especially loud. The suppressed howls of the wolves in the distance gradually disappeared. Only the mournful howls of pain were left. They were mixed with roars from time to time. The rustling of the leaves sounded like a gentle breeze, and a few green lanterns lit up in the darkness. When he slowly walked out of the forest, he discovered that it was a dire wolf that was 5 or 6 meters tall. It had a huge body and long fangs. Chapter 1147. On the way back, Dudian detoured from the original route and turned to another route. Moreover, this route was not the closest route to the city where the main computer of the Federation was located. Not many people know the location of the main computer of the Federation. The main computer is the life of the god of science and technology. It is not in the 4 main cities controlled by the consortiums, nor is it in the capital where the chairman of the Federation and the high-level members of the Federation live. It is hidden in a remote and desolate town. The environment of this small town is harsh and there are very few residents. Most of them are robots. These robots are soldiers made by the god of science and technology. They are personally commanded by him. It is because of these robots and his invincible power in the virtual world that he is able to dominate the real world. Even the Terrace Consortium is just his puppet and spokesperson. The other 3 consortiums are just his pawns. They don't even know about his existence. If I want to kill him, I either have to destroy the main computer or turn it off and reset. Obviously, the first is easier than the second. However, if I just turn off and reset the main computer will still exist. I can also learn his method and connect part of my consciousness into the virtual world. I can control the Federation and replace his position, or I can program an AI butler in the virtual world to replace me in managing the Federation, or I can create a mobile port so that I can enter the virtual world of the Federation anytime and anywhere and know everything about the Federation. Dudian jumped between the trees. His speed was not fast. He was recovering his physical strength while thinking about countermeasures. It was extremely dangerous to return to destroy the god of science and technology. It was reasonable to say that the best way was to leave and come back in the future when he had enough strength. This was also the path chosen by the part of the god of science and technology who was infected by him. But time would not wait for him. The longer he waited, the more likely it was that Aisha would have an accident. However, he was not acting rashly. According to the thinking of ordinary people, the god of science and technology, with the help of the mainframe, had a computing power that was 1,000 times greater than his. In terms of intelligence, strategy, and deployment, it was far beyond his human brain's reach. But he did not think so. The god of science and technology had opened a backup second consciousness and controlled the Federation with the help of the main computer. The entire machinery of the Federation was his power. It was difficult to fight with him, but it was not without hope. His computing power was strong and he was 100 times smarter than him. But so what? 1 + 1 = 2. Even if one's computing ability was 10,000 times faster, the answer would still be 2. In Dean's view, there were only a few steps to make the right choice. The speed of the computing ability didn't affect the final result as long as he was prepared in advance. It was like he wanted to defeat the opponent. There were only 2 choices: destroy or reset. Even with the computing power of the god of science and technology, he could only get these 2 answers, so he would not be at a disadvantage in this aspect. As long as the direction is correct, no matter how fast or slow, we will reach the destination. To reset the mainframe, we have to sneak in, find the mainframe, shut it down, and reset it. However, the difficulty lies in how to sneak in. Dean slowly sorted out his thoughts. In this city, he must have arranged countless robots and a large number of laser weapons. Even in the periphery of the city, there will be scouting mechanical bugs and intercepting nuclear missiles. In the past, he was on guard against the people in the Federation, as well as the Emperor of the Fire Dragon country and the Empire. Now that he's on guard against me, he'll probably send more guards. If I were him, I would have made preparations to prevent me from destroying his mainframe. How will he prevent it? Dean frowned slightly and tried to put himself in the god of science and technology's shoes. From the part of the god of science and technology's consciousness, he knew many of the powers that the god of science and technology had mastered, including some high-tech products that were not open to the public in the Federation. Some were military products, and some were equipment used to explore the magic area. He imagined that if the god of science and technology placed several of these amazing equipment in the city, the possibility of him sneaking in would be less than 1%. He's in the light and I'm in the dark. Although he's intelligent, he doesn't know my thoughts. He can only figure out my thoughts and analyze the route I'll choose through my behavior and previous observations. He's been in the virtual world for more than 200 years, and has long been accustomed to using the mainframe to calculate and choose using probability. However, I can't rule out that this time he's serious and will think about the problem from another perspective. Dean felt that it was tricky. It was like attacking a seamless tortoise shell. The key was that the tortoise shell had thorns that could hurt him. Once I step into the Federation's peace circle, I may be detected by him. It's impossible to attack him with the help of the Federation's technological weapons. Now that the consciousness of the god of science and technology has been swallowed by me, I can no longer mobilize the Federation's instruments. If he besieges me with the mechanical army, I can only escape or annihilate them all. Dean slowly stopped walking. After careful consideration, he suddenly felt that killing the god of science and technology seemed to be more difficult than sneak attacking His Majesty of the Empire and the 2 dragon kings of the Fire Dragon country. After all, the latter hadn't integrated into the virtual world and turned the whole country into his body and eyes. There was still hope to sneak around them, but it was difficult to sneak into the Federation. Should he just give up like this? Dean sat cross-legged and fell into deep thought. Today's god of science and technology should be on guard against his sneak attack at all times. It was almost hopeless to sneak in alone when the other party was most vigilant. It's impossible to directly attack the host city. The mechanical army there is enough to annihilate the 7 kings of the Empire. But I can't take it by force. I can take it by roundabout way. Dean's eyes flashed. He suddenly thought of the recent major events that happened at the border in the memory of the god of science and technology. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up. He immediately got up and sneaked towards the other side of the forest. The reason why the god of science and technology suddenly arrested him, in addition to the blood moon, was that the border was not peaceful in recent days. This kind of restlessness was not because of the endless war at the border, but because the war had become dangerous. The military strength of the Empire had obviously increased by several times. Moreover, the shadow of the King of Kings had appeared. It seemed that they were ready to fight with the Federation. For more than 200 years, the border between the Federation and the Empire had been frictions. However, there were less than 5 times where the King of Kings participated in the war. Both sides suffered heavy losses each time. This time, the god of science and technology had sneaked into the Empire's side. It seemed that a new fierce king had appeared on the Empire's side. He had suppressed the King of Light who had occupied the first position for decades. And this time, it seemed that the new king and the King of Light would come to the border. Chapter 1148. The moonlight paved the way, and the shadows of the forest scattered like the hair of a witch. Scarlet or green eyes shuttled through the forest. They were some night hunters. A silhouette dashed through the forest, and suddenly jumped onto the top of a huge tree. Like a feather, it raised its head and looked at the world outside the forest. After determining the direction, it continued to jump into the forest ahead, moving stealthily all the way. After leaving the extremely vast and barbaric monster forest, Dean followed the memory of the god of science and technology towards the border of the Federation. He crossed hills and swamps along the way. From the monster habitat area, he moved to the road from the peace circle to the border. It was an extremely vast plain. There were small woods where snakes and beasts lived. Dean used his X-ray vision to scan the surroundings. Soon he saw a set of footprints and huge tire marks. The grass on the plain had been trampled into the mud. He got closer and observed a little. He recognized that it was a military mecha made by the Terrace Consortium. He even recognized the model. It was a team of Dragon Knight mecha. It had amphibious combat capabilities. It had lasers and ultrasonic waves. It could be a large-scale killing weapon. It also had a very strong killing ability. From the traces, it should be left during the day. The crushed grass is still very fresh. Dean's eyes flashed as he followed the traces. Along the way, he passed by a small forest. Suddenly his eyes moved. There was a trace of surprise in his heart. He quietly hid his figure and quickly approached the small forest. When he was less than 5 li away from the small forest, he suddenly sped up. He didn't care about exposing his whereabouts and activated his flame cutter wings. Like a demon of the night, he rushed into the small forest that was thousands of mu in size. Damn it, run! A whistling sound came from the quiet small forest. The leaves trembled. Several shadows quickly jumped out of the small forest and fled to the other side. However, Dean broke out at full speed. He was like a hunter. He quickly approached the shadows at a speed visible to the naked eye. It only took him 10 seconds to catch up with the shadows. These people had also noticed this scene, and their faces paled in shock. They had not expected to encounter such a terrifying person, and it was not a Federation mecha, but more like one of their own. However, from the aggressive manner in which the other party was approaching them, it was clear that he did not have good intentions. They knew that the Federation had collected their technology and genes, and had also secretly created some magic mark warriors that were similar to them. They immediately determined that Dean was a war machine cultivated by the Federation. Split up and run. Serena, send a message back. Tell them that we've encountered a demon raised by the Federation. Its strength is close to that of the Lord of the Abyss. The few people who were fleeing in panic quickly communicated with each other and dispersed. Dean's hearing was so sharp that he heard what they said in the headset. His eyes were slightly cold, and a blood-red eye-like gem appeared on his forehead. 4 beams of light flashed in the darkness and disappeared into the dark night. The next moment, several miserable screams came from different directions in the grove at the same time. Whoosh! Dean did not look at the direction of the scream. He identified one of the blonde women and chased at full speed. Captain! The blonde woman heard a few screams coming from the headset, and her face turned pale with fright. However, she had received professional training after all. She only panicked for 2 seconds, and her eyes suddenly showed a resolute look. She no longer ran away, but stood still and quickly opened the combat system on her arm. Her fingers were like phantoms, and she quickly entered the information. At this point, she had given up on escaping. However, the news must be sent back. This was news that was enough to shock the Empire. The Federation could cultivate such a terrifying demon. Who knew how many they had created? Bang! Suddenly, a beam of light shot out and pierced through the blonde woman's arm. Even the metal plate on her arm was shattered. The golden-haired woman was stunned. She even forgot about the pain. In the next moment, when she felt the pain, it suddenly disappeared. An extremely cold aura rose up from behind her. It was as if a devil was staring at her from behind, emitting an incomparably terrifying aura. Her entire body stiffened and her heart trembled. She slowly turned around and saw a devil-like figure with sharp blades growing out of his arms and shoulders. With his back facing the moonlight, he coldly stared at her in the darkness. That pair of extremely cold eyes also shone in the darkness, looking straight into the depths of her heart, making her unable to forget it for the rest of her life. Empire's spy? Dean's eyes were indifferent as he looked down at the blonde woman. At this distance, the latter's life was completely in his hands. She could not even commit suicide. He could clearly see the other's body from the inside out, including the poison hidden in her lips and teeth. At this time, his attention was diverted to the direction of the other's screams. He saw that his companions had been killed by the heat rays gathered by his sun beast. They were lying on the ground motionless, and their hearts had completely stopped beating. Demon. Serena also looked at this terrifying figure. Her beautiful eyes were wide open, full of fear. She did not expect the Federation to be able to cultivate such a terrifying monster. Are you going to sneak in and inquire about the news? Dean looked at her. From the brief words of the previous few people, he deduced some information, which surprised him a little. Was the war at the border so tragic that it actually extended its tentacles into the Federation? In the memory of the god of science and technology, no matter how the war broke out at the border, the residents of the Federation always lived in peace. They lived like the major countries in the old era during peace, and they still had the leisure to pursue all kinds of life enjoyment and entertainment facilities. Serena took a deep breath, and there was a trace of determination in her eyes. She suddenly used her tongue to pry open the poison in her mouth, ready to commit suicide. But a crisp sound rang out. There was a palm print on Serena's face. Her head tilted to the side, and the poison in her mouth flew out and fell on the soil beside her, stained with her saliva and blood. She was a little confused. She did not know how the other party saw through her thoughts. At the same time, she suddenly realized that she could not even commit suicide by poison. She might be extremely miserable next. Thinking of this, her eyes were full of despair. "Tell me the news at the border," Dean said coldly. Serena gritted her teeth. She thought of the smiling faces of her family and sister. Once she betrayed them, their gentle smiles would be torn apart by those cruel executioners. She clenched her teeth and said, "Kill me. Don't think of asking anything from me. I've received professional training. I will never reveal any information." "Haven't you noticed that I'm from the Empire?" Dean said coldly. "I'm a general of the Empire, but I was captured by these trolls and used for experiments. I just escaped today and am about to go to the border." Serena was stunned, and then noticed that the language Dean spoke was the common language of the Empire. However, Dean's previous cruel means made her unable to believe it. She said skeptically, "Is that true? What's your name? I can use other field combat devices to check." "Are you kidding?" Dean sneered. "Who knows what your identity is? Are you a spy who sneaked into the Empire to join the trolls? Or are you a spy who was sent to the Empire by the trolls and came back to deliver information? If I give you the device, will you send a secret signal to your companions?" Serena was stunned and speechless. She did not expect that she would be counterattacked. However, she thought that Dean's words were reasonable, but she still had some doubts. "Pay attention to your current situation. It's easy for me to kill you. You'd better be honest." Dean lost his patience. Serena shook her head and said, "I can't say if I can't prove your identity." "Stupid." Dean spat out 2 words. 10 minutes later, there was a burst of hoarse screams. Serena was naked and tied up in the woods. Her body was covered with scars, burns, and lacerations. She was dripping with blood. Beside her spine, there was a sunken bloody hole. That was where she had buried her magic marks, but now it was gone. Her magic marks had been torn off, and if they were not treated in time, she would almost certainly die. In the surrounding darkness, scarlet eyes slowly emerged. Monsters and snakes slowly approached. Serena, who was weak in consciousness, saw more despair in her eyes. She wanted to commit suicide but couldn't. Whoosh! You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.